Hey guys, tonight we drift through the smoky thresholds of an Ottoman coffeehouse, the air trembling with the faint clack of ceramic cups and the slow, deliberate thunk of wooden chess pieces meeting polished inlaid boards. The scent of freshly ground Yemeni beans swirls around your senses, dark, earthy, almost chocolatey, while a low murmur of voices rolls like a lullaby against the walls tiled in indigo and gold. You nudge the carved sandalwood door, and a hush seems to welcome you, as though the entire room has agreed to speak only in whispers. A bearded patron curls fragrant apple tobacco through a slender reed pipe, and you catch yourself thinking you could stay here forever. Though, reality check, you probably won't survive this if you try matching their nightly caffeine intake. You glide toward a corner divan, cushions rising in muted burgundies and saffrons, each one sinking softly beneath your weight. Fingers brush velvet. Toes slip out of stiff modern shoes and stretch like shy tourists across a cool Anatolian kilim. That rug, woven generations ago in Konya, hides tiny patterns of tulips and crescents you could swear wink at you beneath the flicker of oil lamps. On one low table rests an octagonal chessboard of mother-of-pearl and ebony, squares glimmering like a tiny galaxy. Two elderly men occupy the board, neither in any hurry. In fact, one seems to have nodded off mid-calculation, his turban tilting at a heroic angle at a mainstream historical fact floats gently into the room. You remember learning that by the mid-17th century, these urban coffeehouses, kavahain, had become intellectual salons where poets, traders, and janissaries argued everything from new Persian verses to the price of Bulgarian sheep. But here, for tonight, you tune out the heavy politics and focus on the soothing choreography of cups lifted and good-natured sighs exchanged. A bow-tied attendant glides past carrying a brass tray the size of a kite. On it, spoons rest upside down. Tradition says they cool faster that way, and tiny tulip-shaped glasses of water catch golden lamplight like sleepy fireflies. He stops beside you, lifts the cezve, and pours thick, frothy coffee with a theatrical slow swirl that would make a latte artist weep politely. You sip, grains of cardamom bloom on your tongue. Somewhere behind you, a nightingale in a wicker cage trills a single note of approval. Joke one tiptoes in. You chuckle, realizing this might be the only place where nodding off while your opponent thinks for an hour is considered top-tier sportsmanship. Your gaze returns to the board. The pieces here tell their own stories. The rooks shaped like minarets, the knights wearing turbans tilted at rakish angles. The players move at a pace slower than continental drift. You could probably embroider an entire prayer mat between turns. Yet the game is anything but dull. Every whisper of a move prompts gasps from neighboring tables, some of which are occupied by retired courtiers who treat the contest as though imperial secrets balance upon each square. Historians still argue whether the legendary Grand Vizier Koperlu Mehmed Pasha spent late nights coaching janissaries in endgame strategies or merely popped in for a syrupy locum and a bit of gossip. Close by, an aproned apprentice scrapes thick grounds from an iron pot and casually tosses them over his left shoulder. A quirky tidbit claims those spent grounds ward off envy from rival coffee brewers, though the floor now looks like a miniature lunar surface. Joke 2 shuffles its feet. You muse that modern baristas complain about rush hour lines, but at least no one expects them to exorcise jealousy with stale espresso pucks. A sudden rasp of sand tickling glass draws your attention to the water clock on the mantel. Instead of ticking seconds, it releases single drops into a slender bowl, marking time soft as a lullaby. Each splash gives the chessboard a subtle, ceremonial beat. You sense why Europeans of the era called coffeehouses schools of the wise. Primarily because everyone stayed awake long enough to finish a thought, though here the wisdom appears to be, relax, breathe, wait for your bishop to find enlightenment before you move him. The taller player strokes his beard so slowly you suspect he's animate parchment. He finally lifts a pawn, hovers, then lowers it the tiniest fraction forward. Audible relief ripples across the room. Joke 3 arrives on velvet slippers. You figure if this pawn had wings it still wouldn't reach promotion before Ramadan ends. Yet nobody minds. After that seismic maneuver, the other gentleman responds by adjusting his spectacles, which in Ottoman style resemble delicate silver loops bound by silk cord behind the turban. Rumor, another quirky fringe detail, claims those cords were sometimes perfumed with rosewater so spectators stayed pleasantly awake even as brains melted into midnight stupor. Outside the latticed windows, the Bosphorus exhales a cool breeze. Candle flames bend like lazy dancers, scattering lemon-colored halos. You listen to slippered footsteps rustling across reed mats, to distant prayer calls ballooning then fading like dreams you'll forget by dawn. In this drowsy half-light, you realize chess here isn't a battle. It's a lullaby with pawns singing bass notes and queens offering high, crystalline refrains. Yet tension simmers gently. Some chroniclers suggest sultans slipped spies into coffeehouses to eavesdrop on dissent, though whether these supposed agents wrote down chess results or political rumors remains, well, an open question. Historians still argue whether the ban briefly imposed on coffee in 1656 stemmed from fear of rebellion or simply frustration that no one ever left in time for morning prayers. You lean back, tasting the paradox. A beverage that wakes minds but here lulls hearts. Meanwhile, breakfast for tomorrow, yes, they grind beans at night for dawn customers. Rests nearby in burlap sacks labeled with dates, provinces, and curious annotations like, "Don't mix with goat hair again. Remember that cork later. It'll come back like a punchline wearing fuzzy slippers." Minutes slink by. A storyteller dressed in indigo robes approaches a hearth to recite couplets from Fuseli. Yet he speaks so softly the verses melt between syllables. His voice paints date palms, desert caravans, and shimmering mirages of Damascus soap bazaars. And you almost forget you're nestled among chess philosophers brewing slow ideas. Another mainstream fact drifts up. In many Ottoman cities, patrons paid for a single cup yet lingered all night, the house absorbing costs because a bustling Kavahane signaled civic prestige. That's right. Imagine a modern cafe encouraging you to hog the best couch till sunrise. You'd have baristas filing missing person reports. Your eyes track an elaborate calligraphy panel hung overhead. Tangled Arabic scripts spelling "Patience is the key to tranquility." Under that motto, the players continue their glacial duel. You notice one has tucked a tiny sprig of basil behind his ear. For luck, locals whisper. But some archivists contend basil simply masked the robust scent of unwashed wool cloaks. The scholarly debate circles. Basil as cologne or charm? Either option beats your drowsy attempt at deodorant after an entire day. Within the swirl of lamp smoke, you catch the metallic jingle of coins switching hands at the back corner, wagering on when checkmate might arrive. Odds favor the apocalyptic date of never. Still, a few optimists toss silver axes into the pile, perhaps fueled by the third pot of coffee. You imagine your modern snack budget evaporating in such leisurely bets. The hour dilates. The apprentice creeps by again, offering a wafer of pistachio halva so sweet, it could tuck sugar plums into a child's dream. You bite, it dissolves, and that faint sesame sigh coaxes your shoulders deeper into pillows that were probably embroidered before Shakespeare wrote a single sonnet as you settle. The room's chorus hushes to a murmur softer than rain on clay roofs. You can almost hear your heartbeat sinking to the water clock's drop. 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 Somewhere, the nightingale tries a modest cadenza then yields to slumber. One of the chess players stifles a yawn, dramatically blaming the cruel suspense of his opponent's pending move. You realize you've inhaled 1,000 stories tonight, woven through beans and bristles and basil. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A feathery hush settles over the room as the apprentice flicks the wick of an oil lamp, and you watch the flame stretch like a lazy cat before curling back into itself. Shadows ripple across carved walnut walls, briefly turning every patron into a flickering silhouette. Animated marionettes in a stage play powered by caffeine fumes and patient ambition. You let your fingertips trace the rim of your demitasse, feeling the last lukewarm swirl of foam cling stubbornly to porcelain, as though declaring, "I, too, refuse to rush." Joke one wanders in wearing velvet slippers. You wonder if the foam is auditioning for the role of slowest moving substance after those chess players. Across the room, the storyteller resumes with a fresh anecdote about a camel caravan that once wandered so far off course it supposedly discovered a new variety of date palm, which, according to him, tasted like honey mixed with distant regrets. A mainstream historical fact strolls forward. Merchants of the Ottoman era did indeed haul dates, spices, and silk across endless sand, fueling taverns of trade that made Istanbul glisten like a chandelier strung between continents. The coffeehouse, however, stands like the chandelier's cozy attic. Warm, secretive, and delightfully cluttered. Your attention slides back to the chessboard. The tilt-turbaned elder finally nudges his rook 2 squares, a move so daring someone in the back exhales an audible tisk-tisk. You suspect he rehearsed that motion all evening just to prove time is negotiable. A quirky tidbit floats by certain hardcore chess aficionados here wear rings mounted with magnifying lenses, insisting it helps them inspect the grain of each square for omens, though skeptics joke it mostly helps them spot crumbs of baklava before the house cats do. Joke 2 slowly ties its shoelaces. You consider ordering a lens ring yourself, not for foresight, but to exaggerate the size of every pastry you intend to devour. A ripple at the doorway reveals a Janissary officer, cloak dusted with moonlight, ducking in for a midnight takeaway. He bows to the proprietor, accepts a brass travel flask, and melts back into the alley. Historians still argue whether soldiers used coffee more for strategic vigilance or simply to stave off soul-melting boredom during fortress watch. Either way, you picture troops sipping thick brew from ornate cups while plotting formations that move quicker than this chess match. Though, honestly, a glacier could outmaneuver tonight's contenders. The apprentice reappears holding a shallow ceramic bowl of zesty rosewater to refresh your fingertips. You dip, inhale, and remember that goat hair warning scrawled on the burlap sacks earlier. Apparently the same merchants who misfile beans occasionally shipped goat pelts destined for winter cloaks. Caffeine, goats, textiles. It all ends up mingling in the warehouse of your sleepy thoughts. People say everything connects through trade routes. At this hour, everything connects through the soft hum of drowsy conversation and the faint squeak of chess pieces. A pair of young poets huddle near a pillar, composing Copeck-length verses and debating which metaphor truly captures the moon's reflection on coffee foam. One swears by silver shield, the other counters with melted pearl. Joke 3 shuffles in. You're tempted to propose lunar latte art, just to watch their eyes roll like dice across the low table. Yet their hushed fervor lulls you. The rhyme of their speech washes over you like distant surf. From the adjacent table, scented smoke coils upward from a narghile packed with dried apricot tobacco. You catch a hint of fruitiness that dances with the cardamom on your palate. Another mainstream fact glides into place. Ottoman coffeehouses doubled as social laboratories where new fashion trends, mustache styles, robe colors, turban knots, quietly incubated before spilling onto palace corridors. Tonight you witness Exhibit A, a gentleman twirling waxed whiskers so broad they might qualify as personal shade canopies. He leans over to observe the board, salt crystals of sugar glinting in his beard like tiny constellations. The taller chess player pauses, wipes his brow with a square of silk embroidered in his Nick blues, and sips water so slowly you wonder if he's narrating an epic poem to each drop. He appears poised to castle, but wait, his eyes close. A small snore escapes. The room responds not with laughter but with a knowing nod. Here, falling asleep mid-game is a compliment to your opponent's meditative aura. The second player, gracious host of this miniature nap festival, folds his hands and waits. Somewhere above, the water clock plinks, a glassy lullaby marking the passage of a moment stretched like warm taffy to the counter. The proprietor checks a copper pan bubbling with pekmez, grape molasses destined for tomorrow's breakfast spread. He stirs just once clockwise, muttering an old proverb about fortune following sweetness. A quirky rumor claims that if pekmez is stirred counterclockwise after sunset, the pot will never thicken, superstition or kitchen science. You shrug, deeply invested in neither viscosity nor chronology at this hour. Your eyes drift to a lemon tree in a clay tub near the window. Its tiny fruits glow like lanterns, patiently ripening through the murky Istanbul night. Remember basil behind the ear, Grandpa? He plucks a leaf from the lemon tree instead, rubs it between thumb and forefinger, and breathes the citrus mist as though inhaling courage. People claim certain fragrances sharpen cognitive edges. Perhaps he hopes for divine inspiration, or maybe he just wants to disguise the sleepy scent of hours-old coffee grounds. Historians still argue whether such aromatic habits stemmed from Sufi mystical practice or plain old personal hygiene, especially in a world where bathhouses closed early on holidays. Another low chuckle rounds the room when the apprentice accidentally kicks the pile of wagered coins. Silver discs scatter, clinking like impatient bells. To restore order, he sweeps them up using an upside-down fez, a maneuver so acrobatic you applaud silently. Joke 4 arrives but politely queues behind the others. You imagine modern casinos adopting the fez scoop instead of plastic trays. Jackpot winners would look fabulous. You recline deeper into your mountain of cushions. The embroidered tulips beneath your shoulder blade remind you of the famous tulip era, that brief 18th century bloom of Ottoman luxury and gentle excess. Back then, nobles hosted moonlit garden parties to admire rare tulip bulbs, and some even traded estates for a single particularly striped specimen. Tonight, these humble cushions echo that vanished craze, whispering that beauty often hides in details you nearly overlook, like the fine crackle of glaze on your coffee cup or the barely audible clack of ebony against mother of pearl. The chessboard, meanwhile, edges toward what looks like an eternal stalemate. Knights tangle, bishops glare, pawns form sleepy picket fences, yet the kings remain obstinately safe, protected by pieces too polite to conclude matters. You start to suspect the true objective isn't victory at all but the shared reverie born from focused stillness. In a world galloping forward, these men create sanctuary by refusing to gallop. The lamps dim further as oil wanes. A moth the size of a thumbnail flutters briefly, circles a flame, decides the ambience is too chill for dramatic gestures, and retreats to a rafter. Your eyelids mimic its wings. Up, down, slower every time. Soft footsteps glide across reed mats. The proprietor refills cups, expecting no thanks beyond the dreamy sighs that follow. Somewhere outside, a stray cat yowls, a nighttime aria quickly hushed by the forgiving fog coiling off the Bosphorus. You savor a final sip of coffee, grains settling like miniature sand dunes on your tongue. They say fortune tellers can read these leftovers, mapping futures in muddy constellations. A fringe assertion swirls around the room. If your grounds resemble a hawk, you'll undertake a journey. If they resemble a fish, wealth swims near. You peek into your cup and swear you see a goat wearing a fez. Apparently your destiny involves more cappuccino-colored livestock. A soft thunk announces the elder's ultimate move. Rook to e5. Audible relief sighs across benches. Someone mutters a prayer of admiration. Yet, as usual, the opponent doesn't counter immediately. He lifts his cup, tests temperature, examines grounds, examines cloud patterns through the lattice, consults basil leaf by sniffing it like a sommelier, all before considering a response. Time stretches again, elastic, forgiving, vast. You breathe evenly, matching each water clock drip. The world has shrunk to velvet cushions, cavernous quiet, and the possibility that eternity might be measured in rooks inching across galaxies of pearl. A soft rustle from the corner divan draws your gaze. The younger poets have surrendered their lunar latte argument and now practice couplets on scraps of butcher paper, the ink shining like beetle shells under the dying lamplight. One rhymes coffee with softly, earning an exaggerated groan from his companion, and you smother a smile. Joke 1 tiptoes in. You figure every generation invents bad puns, they just package them differently, sometimes in calligraphy. You stretch, feeling the cushions exhale beneath you, and realize the entire coffeehouse has slipped into a rhythm that feels suspiciously like your own breathing. Your favorite apprentice appears again, balancing a copper tray no wider than a chessboard yet somehow stacked with 6 demitasses, 2 nargile charcoals, and a lone slice of pomegranate, because obviously fruit counts as hydration at midnight. He gifts you another coffee, thicker than the last, its surface shimmering with microscopic oils that mirror the latticework of the windows. A mainstream historical fact floats up with the steam. By 1555, 2 Syrian traders had introduced coffee to Istanbul, and almost overnight, these kavahain became so popular that even palace scribes slipped out to sip courage before tackling mountains of imperial paperwork. Outside, a gust rattles the wooden shutters, and you think of the Bosphorus huffing like an ancient sea dragon. Someone in the back tells a story of sailors who swore the strait could talk, whispering predictions about weather and war. A quirky tidbit insists they brewed coffee with seawater for extra minerals, though nobody present volunteers to test the recipe. Joke 2 saunters through the door. You imagine a modern barista pitching that salty special. Our new briny macchiato tastes like foamy regret and vitamins. Your attention drifts to the chess players, still locked in their genteel stalemate. The basil-scented elder finally raises his queen, pauses mid-air as though awaiting cosmic permission, then eases her one square, just one left. A collective murmur quivers through the room, like pigeons fluttering atop a minaret at dawn. Historians still argue whether games here were deliberately prolonged to avoid the awkwardness of declaring a victor, or whether the pace simply mirrored a broader Ottoman aesthetic that prized deliberation over dramatic finishes. Either way, the queen lands softly, almost lovingly, and you can't help picturing her dusting the square with invisible rosewater before settling in. Someone taps a tiny brass bell near the counter. Last call for fresh locum. The proprietor slices the jelly into cubes, rolls them in snowdrifts of powdered sugar, and threads them onto elegant wooden skewers the length of knitting needles. He offers you one, and as you close your teeth on the pillowy sweetness, powdered sugar tumbles onto your lap like dandruff from a sugared cherub. You brush it away, remembering the goat hair mix-up on those burlap sacks, and chuckle. Joke 3 pokes its head out. At least tonight's sugar snow is goat-free, unless the kitchen's keeping new secrets. The lamps burn low. Amber halos beat against the walls like slow metronomes. Beside the water clock, a moth returns, performing a shy ballet before retreating into rafters lacquered by centuries of smoke. You tune in to the faint hiss of the nargileh charcoal, the occasional chess piece click, and that ever-present drip, drip, drip. Even the poets have fallen quiet, their pages now pillows for drowsy foreheads. You decide to stretch your legs. Padding across reed mats, you notice a tapestry depicting the Siege of Vienna, but rendered so whimsically that cannons fire tulips instead of cannonballs. A guide once told you such joking tapestries hung in coffeehouses to soften memories of war, though whether tulip artillery ever boosted morale remains unconfirmed. Another fringe rumor claims a board weaver snuck the design in because he'd been paid partly in bulbs during the craze. Symbolic payback or artistic satire? The debate, like tonight's chess match, remains unresolved. Near the doorway, the Janissary officer from earlier has returned, canteen refilled, this time lingering to watch the board. He comments that the rook alignment resembles a defensive crescent favored by Murad IV, the same sultan who famously banned coffee in 1633. That mainstream fact cracks through the haze. Imagine outlawing the drink that buoyed an empire's nightlife. Of course, the Janissary smirks, admitting soldiers kept secret brews in tent corners anyway. He winks, suggesting you would have done the same. You nod, licking stray sugar off your lip like a conspirator as you wander back. The apprentice crouches by a brazier warming sweet-smelling ambergris. A puff of resinous smoke curls toward you, and you inhale its oceanic perfume. A quirky tidbit calls out. Some patrons dabbed a hint behind their ears, believing it sharpened strategic thinking. Skeptics claimed it merely disguised the smell of stale garments. Historians still argue whether aromatic rituals genuinely improved cognition or simply offered pleasant distractions while pawn after pawn inched across wooden galaxies. Returning to your nest of cushions, you find the storyteller preparing one last fable. He speaks of a mystical chessboard gifted to Suleiman the Magnificent, supposedly carved from wood that once sprouted on the slopes of Mount Sinai, grain swirling like captured desert winds. Supposedly pieces move themselves at night, forecasting diplomatic victories. Skeptics in the room raise eyebrows so high their turbans shift, but everyone listens because, frankly, why not? Wonder makes caffeine sweeter. The tale trickles into silence, and the board before you creeps toward another pivotal moment. The turban-tilted player, who earlier napped mid-turn, now straightens with monkish poise. He lifts his knight, a tiny steed carved with such finesse you half expect it to whinny. He hovers, then, false alarm, lowers the piece right back, indulging a shrug that says, "Not yet." The room exhales in collective bemusement. You catch the proprietor smirking. Perhaps he's betting on whether the match outlasts the oil in his lamps. Your eyelids feel lined with warm sand. Each blink lasts longer, like slow shutters capturing twilight photographs. You remember the Janissary's remark about night watches, about coffee guarding souls against darkness. Here, the brew doesn't fight sleep so much as guide it, offering a gentle ramp down toward dreams flavored with cardamom and walnut wood smoke. The poets stir, one reciting a fragment. In Velvet Night, a pawn becomes a star, before slumping again, satisfied that inspiration waits even among half-baked metaphors. You decide not to critique. In this room, every unfinished line finds hospitable pause. A gentle reality check surfaces. You'd never survive marathon poetic sparring without Google, but these youths duel dictionaries purely from memory. Respect. Somewhere a rooster cries, far too early, but farm birds ignore time zones and chess clocks alike. The call vibrates through the alley, rattling a few shutters. One chess player chuckles, noting that even roosters move faster than his rook tonight. Laughter ripples. You join softly, the sound bubbling like sleepier applause in a tender gesture. The proprietor douses the least needed lamps, allowing the room to sink into penumbral amber. Shadows lengthen, merging into a soft quilt that tucks around benches and patrons alike. You marvel how silence here isn't empty but plush, filled with microscopic sounds. Cloth whispering, embers sighing, hearts beating very, very slowly. That's joke for sneaking past the quota, but you forgive it. Apparently jokes, like pawns, sometimes promote themselves. Through the latticed window you glimpse Orion dipping toward the horizon, stars flickering like distant sugar crystals. Somewhere beyond, caravans still cross deserts, sailors still brave the Black Sea, and scholars still argue over whether caffeine fueled more poetry than politics. Inside, two old men remain guardians of a board that might never decide a winner, and somehow that feels perfect. You sip the last thread of coffee, grounds clinging to porcelain like storm clouds on a miniature map. Perhaps tomorrow someone will read your fortune. See goats and fezzes marching across hills of foam. Tonight, you need only close your eyes. Let the drip, drip, drip of the water clock guide your pulse, and trust that the slowest game in Istanbul will stand vigil until dawn. Somewhere between the last languid clack of a pawn and the first hint of pale cobalt seeping into the window lattice, you sense the night reaching its deepest hush, the pocket of stillness that sailors call the glassy hour. You draw in a long, slow breath, tasting the lingering cardamom on the back of your tongue, and notice how the shadows along the tiled walls have grown so soft they seem more like watercolor than darkness. The apprentice glides by, refilling lamps with practiced care. The way the oil gurgles from his pewter ewer could pass for a lullaby. Joke one peeks out, rubbing sleep from its metaphorical eyes. You suspect the young man could measure time itself by the number of half-lit wicks he's trimmed tonight. Across the room, the storyteller, robe now draped over his shoulders like a midnight cape, leans close to a trio of janissaries, whispering a tale about an elephant once paraded through Topkapi Palace gardens simply to prove the empire could import anything, even wonder. A mainstream historical fact ambles alongside. In 1582, a real elephant did indeed stomp through an imperial festival, its feet padded in silk to mute the noise, lest it disturb visiting dignitaries. Yet here, the anecdote softens into legend, as if the elephant still haunts these dawn hours, pacing quietly behind the kitchen where coffee beans roast. Your gaze drifts to the chessboard. Both players remain in place, though now their eyelids flutter dangerously, little shutters closing on windows of concentration. The basil behind the ear elder presses fingers to temples, perhaps massaging ideas awake. His opponent stretches, absorbing the crackle of stiff joints like a secret code. A quirky tidbit wafts over from a nearby spectator who insists certain grandmasters chew fennel seeds during marathon matches, crediting the herb with moving thoughts along faster than bishops. No one asks why these two prefer basil and patience instead. Slow is the house brand. Outside, the first eason of the day rises, threaded through morning fog. The muezzin's call unfurls like silk across rooftops, and for a beat, every cup, every breath, every moth's wing seems to pause in midair. Historians still argue whether early Ottoman coffeehouses briefly closed during each prayer interval or merely dimmed lanterns and lowered voices. Here, practice wins over policy. The proprietor simply places a wooden screen over the samovar spigot, a symbolic nod toward reverence, while patrons bow heads or stay still, letting the chant settle over their shoulders like a warm shawl. You feel the call ripple through you, a tuning fork for the soul. When the final note fades, conversation stirs again, tender as a kitten waking. The apprentice offers you a slim glass of water flavored with a single clove. He whispers it resets the palate. You sip, the coolness coaxing away coffee's dusk and making room for dawn. Joke 2 unspools, lazy and kind. If palate resets were mandatory, half the poets here would lose their favorite excuse for overwriting metaphors. Meanwhile, a charcoal vendor slips through the doorway, carrying a wicker basket balanced on his hip. He trades fresh, glowing briquettes for yesterday's ash, muttering that fire sleeps too, always hungry upon waking. The proprietor answers with a grunt that might be agreement or might simply be the universal language of merchants tallying credit. A mainstream fact moseys in. By the empire's height, Istanbul employed entire guilds for such nocturnal trades: charcoal men, water sellers, lamp oil runners, each one synchronizing the city's vast circulatory system long before street lamps or alarm clocks. You stretch your legs toward the hearth and watch amber coals wink alive under a whisper of bellows. The heat strokes your ankles, persuading them to release hidden knots. Remember the goat hair burlap from earlier? One coal pops loudly, sending a spark skittering across the floor. The apprentice stamps it out with a goatskin slipper. Callbacks, like wayward sparks, seem unavoidable in this place that a newcomer slips inside. A Sufi dervish wrapped in dove-gray wool, Semizan hat tilted respectfully low. He bows, requests nothing but hot water, and settles near the lemon tree, fingers threading an amber rosary. You catch the faint click of beads, a gentle metronome beneath all other sounds. The playwright in you pictures him whirling later in some moonlit courtyard, but right now he chooses stillness, eyes half closed, perhaps turning inward toward the same spacious quiet you've been drifting in all night. The basil elder finally stirs, lifting his queen with solemn care. You sense significance, the way musicians hold a rest before striking the first note of a new movement. He slides the piece diagonally, parking her beside the enemy rook. A subtle gasp floats up, shared by maybe 4 people awake enough to track the board. Joke 3 yawns, then smirks. You imagine fireworks if this were a modern tournament, but here the climactic move scores about the same decibel level as a kitten's sneeze. The opposing player, spectacles glinting with fresh lamplight, leans forward, nods as though accepting a formal invitation, and nudges a pawn in response. Your limited chess fluency tells you the pawn choice is both brave and absurd, but perhaps that's the point. Historians still argue whether Ottoman chess culture prized artistry over victory, citing manuscripts that praise games of aesthetic grace, where symmetry sometimes trumped checkmate. The debate remains unsolved, yet tonight's duel seems to side with the poets. From somewhere behind the counter comes a faint hiss and a sudden floral scent. The proprietor has tossed dried orange blossoms onto the brazier. The fragrance curls through the air, mingling with frankincense still lingering from earlier. A quirky snippet claims orange blossom smoke wards off insomnia, and possibly mosquitoes, though you wonder if it's merely code for, "Please don't nap on my cushions past sunrise." You glance at the poets. One has produced a miniature reed flute and toys with a melody so fragile it could shatter at loud applause. The notes flutter over the chessboard like shy butterflies, landing in ears, stirring smiles. You recognize the tune, an old Anatolian lullaby about shepherds counting stars. Your eyelids flutter in time, and you surrender a fraction more weight to the cushions. The apprentice returns, offering fresh borek hot from a countertop brazier. Spinach tucked in flaky dough, edges charred just enough to whisper crisp secrets. You bite, and steam spools across your tongue, tasting of fields far from stone streets. Another mainstream fact taps your shoulder. Ottoman kitchens often began baking before dawn so bread and borek could ride morning carts to wealthier homes. What you're eating was likely headed to some vizier until the apprentice misallocated inventory in your sleepy favor. Outside, the eastern sky blushes. A seagull cries, sharp, jubilant, then wheels away toward the golden horn. In that moment, you realize the night has folded itself neatly into memory, tucked under the day's approaching edge. Yet inside, lamplight still glows golden and unhurried. Dawn must cater to the coffeehouse's timetable, not vice versa. The charcoal vendor departs, leaving a snow-white trail of ash footprints that the apprentice will brush away later. You track them fondly, evidence that even the quietest guests leave stories behind. Remember the elephant? Somewhere in those prints, you imagine smaller, impossible prints. The ghost of that silk-footed beast still strolling palace gardens. Tales pile like footprints until they, too, are swept, but never lost. The chessboard waits. Queens stare across shimmering squares. Rooks crouch like patient guards. Pawns stand bravely in neat confusion. You inhale, exhale, and feel a ripple of gratitude that such slowness exists, that somewhere on Earth a game can stretch its limbs across an entire night and still not need to finish before breakfast. You close your eyes for a single, luxurious blink, promising yourself you'll reopen them. Yet lids linger, weighted by boric warmth and flute lullabies, while the muezzin's echo thins to a silver thread. Somewhere beyond the lattice, the Bosphorus changes color from charcoal to pearl. Inside, basil leaves curl, orange blossoms smolder, and the rosary beads click on. When you open your eyes again, seconds? Minutes? The board hasn't changed. Not a single piece has moved. Perfect. The night's slow story remains intact, cradling you gently as the horizon lights up, promising still more chapters of unhurried wonder. The hush inside the Coffeehouse stretches like fresh dough, so thin and delicate you half expect it to tear if anyone laughs too loudly. Yet somehow, the quiet just keeps expanding, cradling every clink of porcelain and every reverent shuffle of pawns. You lean back, feeling the cushions sigh under your shoulders, and notice the oil lamps have dwindled to stubby orange pearls. The apprentice kneels beside one, coaxing the wick higher with a brass pick that looks suspiciously like a repurposed hairpin. Joke one pokes its sleepy head out. You wonder if the coffeehouse maintains a single drawer labeled miscellaneous tools and dramatic hair accessories. The chessboard remains the galaxy's center. After that decisive bishop slide you witnessed earlier, the basil behind the ear elder rests his chin on gnarled knuckles, eyes half closed as though communing with unseen strategists. His opponent, always fond of spectacle, twirls his silver-looped spectacles in slow circles, perhaps hypnotizing the pieces into compliance. The water clock drips on cue, and you realize its gentle rhythm has aligned perfectly with your own pulse. A subtle duet of heartbeats and falling water. Outside, faint hoofs click along the cobblestones. A milkman in a wool cloak edges past the lattice window, leading a sleepy donkey laden with clinking copper cans. The scent of hay and cool morning air drifts in, mingling with roasted beans until the room smells like a countryside breakfast hiding inside a city dream. A mainstream historical fact whispers, by the 17th century, Ottoman milkmen delivered door to door before dawn, their route so reliable that city dwellers set pocket watches by the echo of donkey shoes. Inside this coffeehouse, though no one checks a watch, they check whether the rook has budged. The proprietor appears behind the samovar, pouring thick honey into a ceramic bowl. He claims, half in jest, half in tradition, that a single spoonful wards off sore throats brought on by late-night debates. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some chroniclers record entire treatises on proper honey temperature, insisting it must fall off the spoon, like a slow golden thread, not a hurried ribbon. Evidently, even sweeteners follow the house policy of unhurried grace. The Janissary officer drifts back through the door, another clandestine refill in hand. He winks, sets a coin on the counter, and lingers by the tapestry of tulip-firing cannons. You overhear him telling the proprietor that supply ships just docked at Galata, bringing fresh beans from Mocha. Historians still argue whether those Yemeni beans truly tasted superior or whether Istanbul's elite simply loved anything that traveled halfway across the world on a daring sea route. Either way, the Janissary claims tonight's batch has the aroma of camel saddles and victory, which, you decide, is either the highest compliment or the strangest marketing pitch since goat hair coffee sacks. Your attention drifts to the poets, now rousing from their parchment pillows. One blinks, notices a perfect crescent of powdered sugar imprinted on his sleeve, and immediately christens it Moon Dust of Inspiration. Joke 2 ambles in, yawning. You suspect he'll recycle that line in every tavern from here to Edirne, claiming spontaneous genius each time. Still, their sleepy grins add warmth to the room, and you silently thank them for inventing new metaphors so you don't have to. The apprentice returns with a saucer of Kamak, clotted cream thick enough to stand a spoon upright. He places it beside you alongside a freshly baked borek whose fragrant steam unfurls like a silken banner. With each bite, the pastry crackling, the cream dissolving into buttery clouds. You feel time dilate again, each chew becoming a chapter in a very short, very tasty memoir at the chessboard. The spectacled player finally breaks the stalemate by advancing a knight. The wooden horse glides into a gap like a whispering breeze, and the entire room inhales sharply. One elderly spectator claps a single, polite clap, then realizes applause might ruin the sanctity of slowness and promptly switches to silent approval, palms hovering but never meeting. Joke 3 sidles through the doorway carrying a cloak of irony. In any other sport, a single move after 3 hours would prompt boos. Here it earns aura-level reverence. A dusty gold sunrise begins to feather the latticework, scattering honeycombed light over chess squares and half-empty cups. You study the motes dancing in the beams and remember how the storyteller claimed Suleiman's mystical chessboard caught sunlight and reflected prophecies. In this quieter dawn, every particle of dust seems willing to carry predictions if you just squint long enough. The proprietor pulls a lever on a tall samovar, releasing a soft hiss that sounds exactly like a satisfied sigh. He tops off your demitasse with the first brew of the new day, darker and silkier than midnight ink. Another mainstream fact slips into the steam. Coffee was once taxed by bean count in certain Ottoman provinces, leading smugglers to hide raw beans inside hollowed-out pomegranates. Somewhere, a scholar still catalogs pomegranate-shaped contraband in museum drawers. You raise the cup, let the ground swirl, and cannot resist peering inside. This time, the pattern resembles 2 tiny paw prints. Perhaps the resident alley cat, the one who yowled earlier, will claim you as family. Or maybe the image is pure coincidence wrapped in wishful fatigue. Fringe diviners might say a paw print means loyalty and homecoming. Skeptics would roll their eyes so hard their turbans might spin. Historians still argue whether tasseography began in Highland Anatolia or drifted in from Persian court rituals, but you sidestep the debate by taking another sip. Coffee researchers rarely win against caffeine cravings. Outside, the milkman's donkey brays, chasing pigeons into the peach-colored sky. The poet sees that moment, composing a spontaneous haiku about dairy, feathers, and destiny. Their syllables stumble, yet the earnestness is charming, like a kitten trying to roar. You catch yourself smiling, feeling dawn knit itself around your shoulders like a shawl woven from gentle beginnings. Inside, another move glides across the board. This time, the Basil elder advances his pawn 2 squares in a rare burst of decisiveness. Several patrons gasp. One drops a sesame seed from his simmet as if the future just tilted. You feel the room tighten. Not tense, just attentively snug, like a quilt being tugged into place. The spectacle of incremental progress proves oddly exhilarating. The way watching grass grow might thrill a botanist who owns the only magnifying glass in town. The apprentice, never idle, strolls about with a bronze censer, wafting tendrils of frankincense that coil above heads like miniature galaxies. He claims the resin calms nerves and clears minds for strategy. A quirky rumor suggests frankincense also repels certain moths that once plagued coffee stockpiles by nibbling the burlap. Whether true or not, you note the lone moth from earlier is conspicuously absent. You let your eyelids flutter half-mast, listening to the symphony of dawn. The water clock drip now harmonizing with distant hammers from dockworkers, the chess pieces punctuating conversation like mellow drumbeats, the poet's whispered verses providing treble. The entire city seems to breathe in slow syncopation, and you drift on that tide, a leaf on the Bosphorus of sound. Another historical whisper. During the tulip era, it was fashionable to host pre-dawn gatherings called seher, where guests watched flowers open while sipping the first coffee brew. You glance at the lemon tree by the window. One blossom uncurls, offering pale citrus perfume to the waking room. Maybe, you think, this coffeehouse is staging its own silent seher, replacing gardens with divans, yet preserving the marvel of things that unfold only for patient eyes. Your vision softens again, and cushions cradle you like low, rumbling clouds. You note a final comedic thought. Joke 4 tries to vault over the quota but meekly lands in your lap. If patience were taxable, these chess players would bankrupt the treasury faster than they move their bishops. You forgive the extra joke. Dawn is generous and rules bend like willow branches at sunrise. The spectacled gentleman lifts his rook, holds it aloft as the sun's first full ray catches the mother-of-pearl inlay, casting a prism across the board. Time stops. Even the water clock seems to skip a beat. Then, with infinite tenderness, he sets the rook down, sealing whatever fate this game has been inching toward all night. You exhale, feeling your shoulders melt into the cushions, aware that victory or defeat hardly matters. What matters is the shared hush, the golden spill of morning light, and the way a single slow game can cradle an entire universe of stories. You let your eyes close, letting the chessboard fade into soft, amber mist, trusting that when you wake, the pieces will still be here, loyal sentinels of tranquility. Dawn finally unfurls its full blush across the lattice, and soft ribbons of apricot light glide over the mother-of-pearl chessboard, making every square look like a tiny sunrise of its own. You stretch, savoring the mild sting of muscles that have been lounging too long, and discover your coffee's surface has cooled into a glossy mirror. Your reflection appears upside down and a bit smug, as though it's proud you survived the night on nothing but beans and patience. Joke 1 wakes up and waves. You think your reflection deserves a loyalty card. 10 more upside-down stairs and the proprietor might comp you a cinnamon stick. The basil behind the ear elder nods courteously to his opponent, then produces a small crimson pouch from his robe. A gasp flutters through the room as he spills a single amber bead onto the board. It lands with a soft tap beside his king. Certainly not regulation, but nobody protests. A mainstream historical fact settles beside the bead. Ottoman players sometimes used talismanic stones, believing a lucky charm could tilt destiny in subtle ways, even if the charm merely reminded them to think before blundering a bishop. The elder's talisman gleams like captured dawn fire, and you wonder if it's petrified sap or perhaps just polished honey candy waiting for a mid-game snack. Outside, hoofbeats beat a gentle tattoo as a vegetable seller trots by, his cart wobbling under pyramids of eggplants so glossy they could double as hand mirrors. He calls out in sing-song Turkish, hawking produce to the early cooks already heating cauldrons. A quirky tidbit drifts in with the scent of fresh mint. Some imperial kitchens paid extra for eggplants shaped like tiny crescents, claiming they brought lunar luck to palace banquets. You picture chefs squinting at vegetables with calipers, then remember the sugar crescent on the poet's sleeve and grin. Apparently shape obsession runs rampant in this empire. The poets, by the way, have rallied. They now pass around a single quill like a relay baton, each adding one spontaneous line to an epic about the glorious slowness of nearly moving. Their parchment resembles a garden path. Ink sprouts here and there, curling toward no obvious destination. Historians still argue whether such chain poems were genuine collaborations or secret contests to slip the silliest line past sleepy peers. Either way, someone just rhymed rook with kabuk, walnut shell, and looks unbearably pleased. You shift, noticing the apprentice laying out thin porcelain saucers filled with watery honey studded with floating thyme leaves. He explains, sotto voce, that certain patrons dip fingertips in the mixture to sweeten their luck before decisive moves. Another local ritual. Joke 2 steps forward wearing honey-glazed shoes. You imagine modern esports arenas adopting sticky luck bowls and immediately voiding every warranty on keyboards. At the chessboard, spectacles finally grows bolder. He lifts his bishop, traces a tiny circle in the air, an elegant flourish no doubt intended to impress the slowly forming breakfast crowd, and parks it squarely in the elder's territory. You expect a collective gasp, yet the room answers with a single polite cough. Drama never shouts in this cafe, it merely clears its throat. You lean closer, trying to decode their endgame geometry, but the apprentice whispers that here endgame is a loose term. Some matches meander over 2 or 3 days, paused for naps, errands, or entire eclipses. The open scholarly debate resurfaces. Historians still argue whether these marathon games produced better strategic innovations or simply inflated Istanbul's pillow industry. Smells evolve again. The proprietor has begun frying mukver, zucchini fritters flecked with dill. The sizzle is soft, considerate, like applause muffled by gloves. You accept a fritter, crack its crust, and watch steam pirouette into morning light. The interior tastes of garden courtyards at noon, salty feta, and a promise you'll eventually sleep. Joke 3 arrives riding a zucchini. You note that after a night of continuous coffee, Sneaking vegetables into fritters might be the most subversive act of health on record. Beneath the counter, a tortoiseshell cat. Yes, the probable owner of those paw-shaped fortunes. Slithers out, yawns so wide you glimpse a pink cavern of feline philosophy, then parks herself on a folded cloak beside the chessboard. Neither player flinches. Apparently cats are legitimate spectators here, provided they refrain from capturing pieces with their tails. A fringe anecdote claims one legendary game was forfeited when a particularly judgmental Angora sat on the Black Queen. Skeptics roll their eyes, but you secretly hope it's true. The dervish by the lemon tree finally opens his eyes, threading the last bead of his rosary with a click so soft you feel it in your teeth. He notices the cat, smiles, and murmurs something about all creatures turning in the same cosmic dance. You catch only fragments, yet his calm floods the room like pale gold tea, steeping everyone in hush. The apprentice glances over, perhaps weighing the odds of recruiting the dervish for unofficial security. The man radiates serenity like a shield. A passing breeze sneaks through the slightly propped door, and the orange blossom smoke swirls, painting invisible constellations before dissipating toward the Bosphorus. You recall the lampwick oil lullaby, the fennel seed superstition, and the elephant in silk slippers. It occurs to you that this coffeehouse is a museum of slowness where exhibits roam freely, stories breed like rabbits, and time checks its shoes at the door. Spectacles leans back, satisfied that his bishop now threatens the amber talisman. The elder eyes the situation, rotates his ring, an obsidian oval etched with impossible fine lines, and calmly slides a pawn of all humble pieces forward to intercept. You're no oracle, but you sense a trap disguised as modesty. Pawns here hide daggers behind doilies. A ripple of admiration drifts across benches, and somewhere the charcoal vendor, returned for breakfast, whistles a low note that sounds suspiciously like, "Nice." Mainstream knowledge pops its head in again. Early Ottoman rulebooks allowed players to promote a pawn to a vizier, not a queen, reflecting local court ranks. Though modern rules dominate tonight's game, the elder's move feels like an homage to that tradition, a reminder that even a foot soldier might rise to graceful power. You store that nugget, vowing to drop it at your next trivia night if you ever rejoin a world that counts hours. The poets break into applause, quiet, of course, then scrawl a fresh line. A pawn is but a seed. Bury it and empires sprout. You wonder whether to credit caffeine, time honey, or sheer sunbeam intoxication for the sudden profundity. Heat from the rising day nudges the interior. Lamps dim beneath sunshine, and the proprietor begins extinguishing wicks with a metal snuffer shaped like a tulip bud. One by one, tiny flames surrender, yet the room remains luminous, walls caressed by natural gold. Remember the tulip-firing cannon's tapestry? In this fuller light, you notice new details. Embroidered soldiers wearing cheeky grins, a nearby squirrel steering a cannon cart. The cartoonish whimsy softens any martial edge, as though war itself must cue politely for coffee before commencing. Joke for attempts a cameo, skidding on time honey, but you nudge it gently back across the quota line. Perhaps it will resurface later disguised as philosophy. You sip water, savor the clove's faint tingle, and feel your nervous system waltzing between alertness and dream. Funny how a night without sleep can still feel restful when the world moves at the speed of kindness. The cat flicks her tail. The elder finally reaches for his rook, the very piece that caught the sunrise prism earlier, and lowers it beside the talisman, fortifying the defense like a seasoned architect adding a tower to a beloved skyline. A silent cheer passes through onlookers. Even the dervish's beads pause mid-swing, acknowledging structure where chaos threatened. You lean back, fritter nearly finished, eyelids drooping in the buttery haze. The sea breeze teases the lemon leaves, frankincense smolders, the drip of the water clock persists, and somewhere beyond, gulls argue over fish with comedic indignation. Yet inside, the Empire's slowest chess match continues to spin silken threads of strategy into dawn's loom, promising that unhurried wonders still await. Sunlight continues to creep across the Coffeehouse floorboards like a polite intruder, illuminating the tortoiseshell cat's whiskers one snowy filament at a time. You test a quick shoulder roll. Bones pop discreetly, grateful for movement after so many cushion hours. The proprietor notices and wordlessly slides over a rolled felt pad. the Ottoman equivalent of a yoga mat. Joke 1 yawns, then observes that if stretching became an Olympic event, this coffeehouse would still insist on qualifying rounds lasting 2 days. Outside, the vegetable seller's cart returns, lighter now, squeaking in friendly protest as it rounds the corner. A vendor of rose petal jam replaces him, balancing jars that catch the sun like stained glass marbles. A mainstream historical fact strolls in behind the jam. By the 1700s, Istanbul's itinerant hawkers were catalogued in city records by the specific cries they used. Municipal officials actually fined vendors whose calls were overly shrill before dawn. You listen, deciding today's jam seller would pass the decibel exam. His chant hovers somewhere between lullaby and love song. The basil elder finally breaks his reverie. He glances at the amber bead, at the fortified rook, and then at you, as if your watching has joined the geometry of strategy. He raises a single brow, perhaps asking whether you, loyal spectator, are awake enough to witness what comes next. You respond with a micro nod, though a rogue side of you wonders if that counts as unauthorized coaching. Historians still argue whether bystanders ever influenced Ottoman chess outcomes with subtle gestures. Some chronicles describe rulers planting accidental coffers behind opponents to telegraph threats. If true, the elder's eyebrow could be a stealthy signal or simply a polite wrinkle. You choose innocence. Spectacles adjusts his silver loops, inhales, and moves his queen 2 squares forward, placing her directly in the line of the talisman-guarded rook. A hush ripples outward like wind over wheat. Even the cat pauses mid-groom, paw suspended, eyes narrowed. Quirky tidbit time. Certain Ottoman manuals advise players to name their queens after famous poets to inspire eloquent tactics. Rumor claims a dashing cadet once christened his queen Scheherazade and proceeded to weave a 40-night victory streak. You wonder whether Spectacles has chosen a poet or secretly calls his queen Traffic Jam. The apprentice reappears with a brass kettle shaped like a crouching lion, steam puffing from its mouth in tiny roars. He pours salop, orchid root milk sweetened with cinnamon, into handleless cups. You cradle yours. The creamy warmth coats your throat, almost undoing the caffeinated buzz you've cultivated. Joke 2 tiptoes in. You realize the beverage progression here is basically a spa day for your esophagus, scrub with cardamom, moisturize with salop, aromatherapy courtesy of orange blossom smoke. Somewhere near the doorway, the janissary officer organizes an informal wager table using upturned lids. Coins, catnip sachets, and one rather dented tulip bulb become betting tokens. The question isn't who wins the game, it's whether the next move happens before the noon eason. You overhear odds hovering at 2-1 in favor of noon arrives first. A fringe wager offers a pastry payout if the cat steals a rook. The dervish laughs silently, palm over mouth, rosary beads glinting like constellations. A soft clang draws attention to the kitchen. The proprietor has hung a copper pan of hulled wheat to toast for kashkak, a hearty porridge often served at midday charity kitchens. Another mainstream fact slides into the scene. Imperial endowments funded imarets that ladled free stews to travelers. Coffeehouse owners sometimes donated ingredients, hoping goodwill brewed customer loyalty. Today, the proprietor whisks wheat and hums, "A good deed keeps the beans fresh." You store that proverb for future corporate presentations. Joke 3 jots a mental note to invoice you for consultancy fees. Your eyes drift upward. Ceiling beams hide faint soot silhouettes, ghost outlines of long-removed lanterns. You recall the goat hair coffee sacks, the sugar moons, and the tapestry's tulip cannons. Callbacks swirl like milk in salop. How many future memories are coalescing in this smoke? You sense them layering. Amber bead, paw print grounds, the cat's suspended paw, all sticking to your mind like rose petal jam. Bells in the distance announce washers setting up at the stone fountains. The poets perk up, seizing the chiming rhythm to recite their collaborative epic aloud. A line about eggplants gleaming like polite mirrors earns appreciative snaps from the charcoal vendor, who's evidently back for encore fritters. The apprentice rewards him with one drizzled in thyme honey. Fuel for clapping. Inside the chess square universe, the basil elder whispers something under his breath. Sounds like a prayer or a pun, then nudges a pawn sideways in an en passant capture. Gasps become the morning's new breeze. Spectacles blinks twice, possibly regretting that queen advance. The elder's pawn, now heroically promoted from foot soldier to saboteur, stands shoulder to shoulder with the talisman. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans embraced en passant immediately after Europeans codified it. Some sources claim the rule traveled east via Venetian merchants carrying both beans and blunders. Either way, the move lands like a feathered hammer. The cat, sensing narrative tension, rises and circles the board. She inspects pieces with diplomatic neutrality, then selects the warmest square of sun and sprawls. Spectacles reaches for his water glass. The cat's tail flicks dangerously close to the black bishop. Collective intake of breath, yet disaster is averted. Joke 4 tries to leap the line, commenting that feline arbitrators should demand hazard pay, but you gently remind it about quota etiquette. Outside, a coppersmith begins tapping sheet metal. The metallic beat pairs with the water clock drip until the room sounds like a minimalist orchestra rehearsing scales. You savor the odd harmony, feeling your own pulse slot neatly between clang and plink. Momentarily, fatigue brushes you, but the solip's silky sugar rallies your senses, allowing you to exist in this liminal glow, both drowsy and attentive, like a candle flame refusing to choose between flicker and fade. You lean back, reconsidering the ebony and pearl battlefield. Spectacles finally lifts a knight, but instead of moving, he polishes the horse's mane with his sleeve, either stalling for time or conducting grooming rituals. The janissary grins, scribbling new odds. The poets add a stanza about knights combing their manes before charging the day. You catch the dervish's approving nod. Apparently spiritual grace extends to well-groomed cavalry. A breeze kicks up lemon perfume from the potted tree, blending with toasting wheat, salep, and distant sea salt. Quirky tidbit. Some palace gardeners believed lemon trees bore sweeter fruit if exposed to chess music. Flute melodies performed beside ongoing matches. The theory remains scientifically dubious, but every time the reed pipe resurfaces, you swear the lemons glow brighter. The proprietor announces, in a voice barely louder than rustling paper, that fresh simmet will arrive shortly from the baker boy sprinting lanes like a ring-shaped comet. You imagine sesame halos still steaming, soft inside, and feel your appetite perk despite the fritter you devoured. Joke 2 already used? Yes, but hunger demands an encore. Quips that your stomach keeps its own ledger, separate from brain, immune to quotas, spectacles, perhaps sensing audience impatience, at last moves the freshly shined knight, hopping it beside the queen. Strategy resets. Odds scramble. The janissary clinks coins. The elder responds not by touching wood but by sipping salep, eyes half shut in contemplative delight. Time, evidently, is his underpaid in turn. You let a slow breath out, tasting cinnamon and rewind. Morning has taken full seat at the table, yet the night's drowse lingers like a shawl over shoulders. You realize you've crossed some invisible bridge. From visitor to fixture, part of the furniture that will witness the match until whenever. Perhaps you'll nap on a divan next, dream of tulip artillery, awaken for noon porridge, still in time to catch the cat's second inspection circuit. The day stretches forth, but in here, the clock continues to drip, politely ignoring the sun's hurry. Late morning sunshine now pours through the latticework in thick honeyed shafts, tipping the Kavahane from lantern-lit cocoon into something closer to a secret garden of gold. You shift on your cushion just as the baker boy finally hurtles through the door, balancing a tall wooden spindle stacked with fresh simmet. Ring breads freckled with sesame and still crackling from the oven. The spindle's shadow sweeps across the chessboard like a sundial, silently announcing that time, however slow inside this room, is still sneaking forward outside. Joke 1 trots in wearing a carbohydrate crown. You salute the boy's agility, half convinced Olympic pole vaulting was invented by someone trying to deliver bread without letting the cat trip him. The aroma strikes first, warm crust, toasted seeds, a faint whisper of molasses used in the glaze, and you feel your stomach applaud. A mainstream historical fact follows the scent. Istanbul's Guild of Simmet Bakers was so strictly regulated in the 18th century that inspectors weighed random rings in the street. Loaves found underweight earned the baker a brief stint in a kang, ensuring no one dared skimp on sesame. Today's batch would pass any ministry scale. Each loop feels satisfyingly hefty as it lands in your palm. You tear a piece, watch steam halo upward, and smear on a lazy swipe of rose petal jam procured earlier from the serenading vendor. Across the room, the basil elder nibbles his own ring, crumbs peppering his robe like faint constellations. He brushes them away, then strokes the amber bead for luck before examining the board. Spectacles Knight still gleams from its recent grooming. The queen radiates poised menace, and that brave en passant pawn guards the rook with improbable valor. A hush settles again, broken only by the wooden thunk of the proprietor tightening the samovar spigot to stop an exuberant drip to floor level. The tortoiseshell cat completes a leisurely figure eight around your ankles, hopeful eyes fixed on the fragrant simmet. You tear off a sesame-dense corner and offer it. She sniffs, turns tail, and settles instead for a sun-hot tile, clearly preferring victories that require zero chewing. Joke 2 yawns awake. You realize the cat's nutritional philosophy rivals that of most emperors. Devour only what flatters the whiskers, delegate the rest to peasants. A thin reed flute picks up its earlier lullaby, the young poet piping soft notes that drift through frankincense wisps like fireflies. Somewhere near the hearth a juggler. Where did he come from? Practices with 3 brass coffee scoops, tossing them slow enough that you'd swear they float on invisible strings. A quirky tidbit claims itinerant performers like him once followed conquering armies, entertaining troops with utensil juggling to test whether spoil of war silver was genuine. Counterfeit alloys supposedly rang flat when they hit each other mid-air. Whether that's truth or tavern tale, the scoops here chime a bright tenor, reassuring everyone their coffee future is genuine. Spectacles clears his throat, adjusting the silk cord of his eyewear, and finally slides a pawn, not boldly forward but back, a retrograde step that reopens a diagonal lane for his bishop. Historians still argue whether Ottoman masters favored such defensive repositioning over aggressive assaults. Some manuscripts praise the wisdom of the ebb, likening tactical retreats to the Bosphorus tides that pull ships safely home. Whatever the scholarship, the move earns approving nods and prompts the janissary to recalibrate his improvised betting board, sliding a dented tulip bulb 2 lids to the left. The proprietor, perhaps buoyed by strategic suspense, unveils a small side ritual. He dips a coral-handled spoon into your half-finished salop, stirring exactly 7 clockwise circles, then declares the drink reawakened. Joke 3 curtsies on cinnamon-dusted slippers. You figure if someone stirred your motivational energy 7 times every morning, even your email inbox would sparkle like mother of pearl. Light continues to climb the walls, revealing new hieroglyphs of soot and steam. You notice, high above, a once-forgotten hoop where cages of songbirds likely hung. Back in the tulip era, patrons supposedly wagered verses on which Finch could trill the longest. The hoop is empty now, but the flute fills the vacancy with trills of its own, each note slipping between chess pieces like a courier delivering micro-messages of calm. Your gaze returns to the lemon tree beside the dervish. Tiny globes of fruit have taken on a deeper gold, as though they've been quietly photosynthesizing stories all night. The dervish, eyes half-lidded, finally breaks stillness, plucking 1 leaf and passing it to Spectacles. No words, just leaf, gesture, smile. An unspoken blessing? A sportsman's handshake? Scholars will doubtless debate the etiquette of leaf diplomacy, but Spectacles tucks it behind his ear, and for a heartbeat the whole room glows a shade warmer. Outside, the dockyard bell tolls 11 times. The water clock inside answers with its own crystalline drip, slower now, each droplet hanging in midair like a reluctant farewell to morning. You stretch again, sensing the first real pulse of fatigue behind your eyes. Yet serenity keeps you anchored. The hiss of samovar, the juggler's metallic rhythm, the faint squeak of the janissary's coin lids sliding into new configurations. Time resembles a long, unspooling ribbon. No knots, no hurried on the board. The basil elder finally leans in, his shadow resembling the silhouette of a cypress tree across pearly squares. He pushes his vizier-worthy pawn 1 square farther, cementing the diagonal barricade. Murmurs flutter. Someone near the window whispers a speculative line. We might see promotion by sunset. The idea feels almost scandalous, promotion within a single solar rotation. How positively rash. Your simmet is now a semicircle of crumbs, and the cat seems to recognize the universal sign for second offering. You comply, trading crust for purr, noting how her tail brushes the tapestry's tulip cannons as she trots away. The cannon embroideries feel less whimsical today. In bright light, they gleam a touch more martial, though the squirrel driver still looks blissfully unaware of artillery protocols. The proprietor lowers the brazier's heat, letting the last of the orange blossom smoke curl ceilingward in lazy spirals. He mutters that too much scent near noon can overwhelm the palate. Balance is everything. You commit the wisdom to memory beside wheat porridge philanthropy. Perhaps you'll craft a self-help scroll titled, Seasoning Life the Ottoman Way. A gull screeches outside, promptly echoed by a second gull that seems to disagree on tonal grounds. In response, the reed flute shifts to a minor key, still gentle but with a mischievous flourish. You glide with the music, eyelids drooping in half-time, and realize you're hovering at that dreamy edge where facts melt into reverie. Elephant footprints echo beneath chessboards, goat hair sacks laugh from storerooms, paw-print fortunes wag their tails in porcelain dust. The Coffeehouse has woven all-night details into a calm net, and you rest inside its knots, spectacles exhaled. Was that a sigh or a chuckle? And touches his queen again but pulls back before committing. Perhaps caution has finally trespassed into his ambition. Perhaps the leaf behind his ear whispers patience. Either way, the game holds like breath before prayer. Another drop falls in the water clock. Another bead clicks in the dervish's hand. Slow continuity reigns. You close your eyes briefly, letting simit warmth radiate through you. Cinnamon soften your thoughts, and the distant clang of dockworkers remind you the wider city chugs on, restless and bright. But inside this room, unhurried grace still rules. Each move and munch choreographed to reassure every traveler that life can, indeed, idle in first gear without stalling the soul. High noon edges closer, but the Coffeehouse refuses the sun's invitation to speed up. Inside, time continues its snail-paced promenade, politely tipping its hat to every oil stain on the floorboards. You finish rolling the last sesame crumb between thumb and forefinger, watching it fall like a single snowflake onto the cat's fur. She blinks at you, offended yet too dignified to complain. Joke one dusts off its symbols. You silently apologize and promise to fund her next grooming session with your imaginary casino winnings from the Janissary's betting lids. The proprietor swaps the empty salop kettle for a taller, narrower ibrick whose neck curves like a question mark. He murmurs that it's lemonade time, citron juice, mint, and just enough sugar to bribe the tongue into happiness. A mainstream historical fact mingles with the minty vapor. Ottoman physicians once prescribed cool citrus drinks to balance the body's humors during hot months, insisting acidic refreshment calmed excessive warmth of the heart. You're happy to medicate accordingly, sipping the frothy top and feeling an imagined physician somewhere nod with approval. Across the room, clacking Abbassai announced the arrival of two silk brokers tallying exchange rates. Their robes shimmer in dual shades of lapis and rust, catching stray sunbeams like fish in a net. They settle at a low table, but instead of talking numbers, they glance toward the still unresolved chess match and quietly take odds on whether the elder's pawn will ever see a promotion square. A quirky tidbit follows their whisper. Certain guilds believed that witnessing a decisive checkmate before closing a contract could foretell profitable deals. Hence, these brokers might linger here all afternoon, praying the board produces closure before the markets do. Spectacles, now sporting the lemon leaf behind his ear like a jaunty feather, rests elbows on knees and contemplates. The basil elder mirrors him, fingertips lightly stroking the obsidian ring that has yet to reveal its etched design in the new light. You study the layout. Rooks stand guard, bishops peer down long diagonals, knights hover like coiled springs, and somewhere beneath the cat's tail, a lone pawn waits for the universe to remember it exists. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffeehouse players generally favored symmetrical openings or learned chaos from nightly debates. Scholars sift through marginalia in court diaries, searching for diagrams no bigger than postage stamps. You hum in amusement. Tonight's game will leave future archivists either delighted or despairing over its elliptical narrative. A sudden hush, different from the usual hush, sweeps the room as a calligrapher enters, sleeves rolled, carrying a lacquered writing box. He bows to the proprietor, secures a corner desk, and begins grinding black ink with such reverence that even the juggler pauses mid-arc, scoops frozen in flight. The scraping stone on inkstick becomes a low, granular song. Joke 2 pirouettes across the stage. You wonder if the faint squeak of ink grinding could be marketed as a premium sleep soundtrack. Zen scribbles, 12-hour loop. Curiosity tugs you closer. The calligrapher dips his reed pen and draws a single swirling letter so graceful it seems to float above the page. You recall a mainstream fact about the Hat-Tat guilds. They regarded each pen stroke as a devotional act, training decades before earning the right to sign a single Quranic verse. Here, the calligrapher copies a poem instead, perhaps the night watch couplet the poets crafted earlier. You notice how the ink dries to soft charcoal, mirroring the soot ghosts on the rafters. Back at the board, movement. The elder, lemonade finished, advances his knight for the first time in hours. Instead of storming forward, the horse lands beside your old friend, the promoted hopeful pawn, creating a neat little phalanx. Spectacles responds with a bishop slide that threatens a distant rook. Hardly lethal, but enough to stir a communal gasp. The janissary clinks lids, adjusts odds, and whispers that an afternoon flurry, clause now triples all wagers. Joke 3 wades in wearing bureaucratic robes. You muse that if real government budgets used flurry clauses, national economies would hinge on how often public servants blinked. Heat outside thickens. Shutters creak as the proprietor angles them to filter glare yet still admit breeze. Through the slatted pattern you spy the Bosphorus sparkling like a crate of spilled diamonds. Loaders shout in Greek and Armenian, blending syllables until language becomes pure rhythm. You marvel at the swirl, cargo, dialects, pawn strategies, all folding into Istanbul's slow-motion kaleidoscope. The apprentice, sensing thirsty mouths, distributes chilled rosewater in miniature glass flacons. The fragrance lifts, delicate as rumor, and you remember the orange blossom smoke from dawn. Oils and petals seem to trade shifts here like courteous sentinels. A fringe superstition drifts back. Some patrons dab rosewater on the pulse point behind the ears, so their whispered secrets bloom into wiser decisions. You toy with the stopper but decide wisdom might overload your sleepless brain. Maybe save that upgrade for a different day. A distant drumroll of hoofbeats breaks the quiet. Courier horses galloping toward the seraglio, dust trailing like comet tails. Traders murmur about fresh news from the eastern provinces. Spectacles glances toward the doorway, momentarily distracted, yet his hand hovers protectively above the queen. You sense competing priorities. Empire-wide intrigue outside, micro-empire of 32 pieces inside. Which kingdom wins? The cat votes for the one that drops pastry crumbs. Light seeps deeper yellow. In this rich glow, the tapestry's tulip cannons look almost aflame, and you notice the squirrel driver now sports a miniature janissary plume. Had that detail always been there, or is fatigue painting flourishes in your vision? Either way, the whimsy comforts you, proof that artistry resists even the solemnity of war icons. The calligrapher caps his pen, drapes the drying sheet over a bamboo rod, and turns toward the chessboard like a theatergoer after intermission. His gaze is piercing yet serene. You half expect him to critique piece placement according to principles of visual balance rather than tactical grit. Historians still argue whether celebrated calligraphers sometimes doubled as chess consultants for sultans, shaping board aesthetics to mirror poetic meter. Whether true or not, you spot the elder offering a micro-bow of respect, acknowledging kindred artistry. Your lemonade glass sweats a cool halo onto the table. You trace the ring, recalling every circle you've met today. Simmet loops, spool of bet lids, the limestone water clock, even the amber bead. They all revolve, each suggesting the same lesson. Beginnings and endings share the same curve, so why rush toward either? Inside this gentle revelation, spectacles commits. Queen slides sideways, positioning for what might become a pin. The elder smiles, mischief or admiration, and responds not with a piece but by rotating his obsidian ring. Sunlight catches the etching at last. You glimpse a spiral motif winding inward like a whirlpool. Another callback floats up. The juggler scoops, the water clock's drops, the infinite swirl of ink on parchment. All spinning, spinning, spinning toward calm. You inhale the lavender mint of your empty glass, feel eyelids flutter heavier, and accept that you're caught in this spiral, too. Maybe the game concludes by dusk, maybe not. Maybe the courier's scroll changes the empire, maybe it's gossip. Yet you reside in a room where decisions sip lemon and twirl like reed pen arabesques, unapologetically slow. For now, you sink back into the cushion, letting the cat's gentle snore, and yes, she snores like a tiny bellows. Fan your own drifting thoughts. You suspect if you fall asleep, someone will mark the time not by hours but by how many pawns maneuver in your dreams. That feels perfectly reasonable. Midday finally perches overhead like a copper brazier, its glare pouring through the shutter slats in bright, trembling stripes. You feel each beam land on your forearms with the weight of a lazy cat, warm but not quite bothersome. The proprietor angled the shutters just enough to make sunlight behave like polite company. Still, the air thickens and you fan yourself with an abandoned bedding lid while the janissary pretends not to notice. Joke one strolls in, chuckling that you've invented the empire's first ergonomic spreadsheet. Sensing the rising temperature, the apprentice wheels out a glazed earthen jug of vin sherbet, sour cherry cordial cooled with snow harvested last winter from Mount Yaludag and stored in deep ice pits beneath the city. A mainstream historical fact tags along with the clinking ladle. Ottoman ice merchants really did haul mountain snow into subterranean car hanes, selling it all summer to sherbet vendors who, in turn, sweetened diplomatic receptions and sweaty chess marathons alike. You accept a tiny porcelain bowl, let the ruby liquid nip your tongue, and watch goose bumps ripple down your arms like miniature janissary formations. Across the room, the juggler has exchanged brass scoops for 3 ripe lemons, their skins glinting as they arc lazily through the air. Apparently every object in this coffeehouse is obliged to audition for cirque duty. A quirky tidbit drifts in behind the juggling. Court chronicles mention a festival where palace acrobats balanced whole trays of sherbet on their heads while somersaulting for sultans, although pictorial evidence suggests at least one tray became an airborne fountain of sticky embarrassment. The poets, inspired, start drafting an ode titled Gravity is merely a suggestion when sugar is watching. You return your gaze to the board. Spectacles Queen now peers down a freshly cleared file, threatening the elder's knight and, indirectly, that heroic pawn. The basil-wearing strategist tilts his head, eyes narrowing but mouth curling in amusement. You detect the faintest scent of thyme on his breath, probably from the honey bowl earlier, and realize aromas around here double as scoreboards. Cardamom for opening, frankincense for mid-game, thyme for tricky forks. Historians still argue whether specific spices were deliberately paired with phases of play or whether coffeehouse folklore retrofitted meaning onto kitchen accidents, but your nose insists pattern trumps coincidence. Over by the window, the silk brokers hiss numbers, passing abacus beads with sharp clicks that mimic the water clock's drip but at twice the tempo. One spots you listening and winks. Apparently currency conversion qualifies as spectator sport when chess refuses to sprint. Joke 2 ambles over in tasseled slippers. You wonder whether economists would calm down if every trading floor piped in reed flute lullabies and ladled sour cherry cordial between bell rings. Spectacles inhales, fingertips hovering above his bishop. Instead of moving, he adjusts the lemon leaf behind his ear, repositioning it like a battle standard. The janissary scribbles new odds with charcoal. Leaf flourish surcharges now apply, which prompts a low groan from the betting crowd. Meanwhile, the tortoiseshell cat stirs, flicking a tail across the promoted pawn square, then flops again as if to say, "Carry on, mortals. Destiny naps." Heat outside swells. Peddlers chant slower. Even the coppersmith's hammer adopts a siesta cadence. Inside, the proprietor unveils a rolled reed blind for the south window, its slats painted with tiny red tulips climbing phosphorescent vines. As he secures the blind, you spot a hidden signature, Ismail the Sleepy, 1689. A fringe rumor says this artisan dozed off while painting and awoke to find the tulips had somehow continued without him. No historian confirms it, but the vines do curl in unpredictable detours, like brushstrokes gone wandering. Your sherbet bowl now holds only crimson echoes, so you crunch the last ice crystal and lean back. The calligrapher, finished with his poem, sands the parchment and offers the page to the apprentices who crowd around like sparrows. The text, ink still glossy, reads, "Patience is the ink, the world, a waiting page." You grin, recognizing a callback to the motto above the hearth. Joke 3 hiccups politely, remarking that if calligraphers trademarked aphorisms, coffee houses would owe more royalties than they spend on beans. At last, the Basil Elder's hand descends. He advances his rook 3 squares along the open file, slamming a gate between queen and knight. The move feels bold, almost theatrical, and a collective ooh flutters up, soft as feather pillows. The rookie pawn burrows deeper behind the rook, ready to sprout titles and fanfare if it can sniff the board's final row. Historians will definitely fight over this sequence. Already you can hear tomorrow's scholars muttering, was it foresight or mere fortuity? Spectacles retreats, considers, then repositions a pawn to buttress his bishop. Defensive ripples in slow motion. You notice sweat at his temples, but the lemon leaf remains jaunty, refusing to wilt. The apprentice chooses that moment to waft a brass censer filled with dried bay leaves and sandalwood. The smoke drifts like a gentle referee, cooling tempers and perfuming perspiration. A quirky snippet surfaces. Some chroniclers insisted sandalwood smoke sharpened arithmetic skills, though rival physicians claimed it only made some smell nicer. You try a quick mental tally of rooks and decide the verdict is inconclusive. Midday Eason rolls across rooftops, the muezzin's voice rich and grounding. Unlike dawn's gossamer chant, this call feels like a firm hand on the shoulder, reminding everyone there's a wider world beyond pawns and pastry. The proprietor lowers the reed blind farther, dimming the room into an amber cave. Some patrons stand, some bow heads. The chess duo simply freeze in place, hands resting lightly on lapels, board holding its breath. Seconds elongate. You follow suit, letting the call settle, reverberate, dissolve. When normal hush returns, the elder gestures toward the board, inviting Spectacles to resume. But instead of touching wood, Spectacles chuckles, a small, airy sound and signals for a break. The apprentice brings 2 silver ewers of rosewater. Both players rinse fingertips, flicking droplets onto the tiles where they sparkle like newborn stars. Scholars still argue whether such pauses were mandated at set move counts or improvised when concentration frayed. Diaries contradict each other, leaving librarians furiously cross-referencing coffee stains for clues. The cat interprets the break as intermission, sauntering over to you for a chin scratch. Her fur carries faint echoes of frankincense, thyme, and now sandalwood, truest archive of the room's olfactory saga. You oblige the scratch. She rewards you with a rumble so deep it could rattle coins out of the janissary's lids. Outside, gulls dive-bomb fishing skiffs, fishermen shout, and the Bosphorus gleams with midday confidence. Yet you remain tucked inside a twilight of unhurried deeds. You realize, with a serenity that feels like sherbet sliding down your throat, that whether or not you ever witness checkmate is irrelevant. You're here for the music of grinding ink, the glint of amber beads, the swirl of sandalwood, and the sly way Basil smells like strategy. Spectacles wipes his spectacles. Yes, that pun finally earns its overdue wink, then resets his posture. Break over. He nudges the bishop onto the long diagonal, launching a skirmish that promises to nibble at the rook's new fortress. You lean forward, second wind billowing like a sail. The room's collective pulse steadies. Pieces begin their afternoon waltz. And you, perpetual observer, tether yourself to the slow rhythmic current as easily as breathing. Drip water clock. Tap abacus. Thrum distant hammer. Per cat. In between those measured noises, your heart slips into place, beating unhurried time for the empire of slowness you now call home. Late afternoon yawns over Istanbul, the sun tilting westward like a gilded platter emptied of noon's fierce light. Inside the Coffeehouse, however, the atmosphere cools into a mellow amber, as if someone poured warm honey over the scene and told time to take the rest of the day off. You stretch your legs, flexing toes against the kilim's faint ridges, and notice that even the tortoiseshell cat has graduated from half-nap to full split, belly splayed like a furry Ottoman no one dares disturb. Joke 1 wanders in, removes its sandals, and whispers that if interior decorators bottled this level of coziness, every office cubicle would turn into a pillow fort. On the chessboard, Spectacles has just completed a nimble bishop-to-rook trade, the first real exchange in hours. Ebony and pearl pieces clack softly, and the Janissary notes the capture with ceremonial gravity, sliding a bent copper coin into the afternoon casualties cup. The Basil elder lifts the felled rook, inspects the carving as if appraising antique furniture, then pockets it with an approving nod, souvenir of patience. A mainstream historical fact drifts across the hush. Scholars record that Ottoman cafes sometimes allowed players to keep defeated pieces as mementos, a custom meant to sweeten the sting of loss and guarantee they'd return for rematches and refills. You imagine modern chess clubs handing out tiny trophies instead of bruised egos. Corporate morale would skyrocket. The apprentice, never idle, now pushes a cart laden with Kaisi Hozaf, apricot compote chilled with yet more mountain ice. Syrup glistens in shallow copper bowls. Amber fruit halves bobbing like sleepy koi. He ladles a portion for you. The first sip is a cool silk scarf around your tongue, tart edges softened by clover honey. Quirky tidbit time. A dog-eared manuscript claims certain viziers judged one another's hospitality by how transparently the apricots floated. Clear syrup signified moral clarity. Cloudy syrup implied murky politics. You peer into your bowl. Today's brew is crystal, at least by candlelight standards, so you feel modestly virtuous without doing any actual work. Outside, the breeze stiffens, carrying briny hints from the Sea of Marmara. Shutters rattle, and the proprietor secures them with a length of indigo cord. He hums a Moccam scale under his breath, each descending note dissolving into sandalwood haze. Historians still argue whether these improvised tunes shaped the evolving classical repertoire or simply echoed popular tavern songs. Either way, music and coffee seem fused like beans after roasting. Inseparable, aromatic, Spectacles examines the board anew. Bishop exchanged, queen still menacing, knight lurking like a coiled spring. He tugs the lemon leaf from behind his ear, studies its veins, and finally sets it on the edge of the table, an unofficial resignation of flourish. Then he advances the knight 2 L-shaped leaps, forking pawn and rook. Gasps flutter across cushions. The juggler drops a lemon mid-arc, earns polite applause for the fumble, and bows with theatrical shame. Joke 2 cartwheels by, joking that gravity clearly changed its mind today. First the lemon, next the economy. Better keep the abacai lubricated. Your eyes drift to the calligrapher who has transitioned from reed pen to gold leaf, illuminating the motto he drafted earlier. Tiny flecks catch the slanted sun like fireflies, each brushstroke a spark of deliberate radiance. You realize he's gilding only the initial letter, leaving the rest matte, a lesson in restraint. You file that under decorating tips no influencer will explain without 5 sponsorships. Back at your table, the silk brokers have expanded their abacus orchestra into a duet, beads clacking in counterpoint to the water clock's slower drip. One of them, noticing your stare, explains that interest rates on Genoese loans have nudged skyward, just like that night of his. He points at the board, winks, and resumes calculations. You sip apricot syrup, feeling like you've unlocked a new spectator tier, real-time finance commentary embedded in a historical ASMR stream. The Basil Elder remains unfazed by the knight's intrusion. He rotates the obsidian ring once, always clockwise, and slides a bishop along the long diagonal, both blocking the fork and eyeing Spectacle's queen. This quiet parry coaxes an appreciative murmur from the dervish, who finally rises, stretches arms skyward, and murmurs an invocation that sounds like wind untying knots. A breeze follows, as if accepting the invitation, fluttering reed-blind slats and lifting a few stray sesame seeds from the floor. You notice the proprietor lighting a tiny oil lamp inside a colored glass lantern, even though daylight still lingers. The flame projects ruby hexagons on the ceiling beams, foreshadowing the evening glow. Mainstream facts slide in. Before gaslights, Istanbul's coffeehouses often pre-lit lanterns hours ahead so patrons wouldn't jolt when dusk collapsed. Illumination eased down like a curtain instead of slamming shut. You glance at those ruby spots, letting your eyelids mimic the gradual fade. The poets, revived by compote sugar, perform a dramatic reading of their epic's newest stanza. O knight who hops like startled deer, /fear not the pawn who learns to steer. It earns mixed reviews. One broker snickers, the juggler claps politely, and the cat yawns with theatrical boredom. Joke 3 slides onto stage left, whispering that feline critics accept bribes mostly in sardines, rarely in metaphors. Spectacles finally exhales a long thread of breath, rearranges robes, and lifts his queen for what looks like a decisive thrust. Yet midway he hesitates, setting the piece down on its original square with a rueful grin. The Janissary slashes odds, citing the false charge clause that penalizes abandoned attacks. Coins clink, tulip bulbs shuffle, and someone stakes a bet using a tiny bundle of saffron. High stakes indeed. Afternoon drifts toward evening. Pigeons outside were overhead, casting scallop shadows on shutter slats. A courier bursts past the doorway, sandals slapping stone, scroll clutched high. He doesn't stop, but the gust he leaves behind tastes of parchment dust and urgency. You wonder what edict or love letter speeds through the alleys, and whether the sender knows time moves differently in here. Slower, kinder, padded with apricot syrup and sandalwood smoke. The elder, perhaps inspired by the courier's momentum, nudges his valiant pawn one more square. Only 2 to go before promotion now. A wave of quiet electricity ripples across benches. Even the cat lifts her head, ears twitching as if pawns emit ultrasonics humans can't hear. Historians still argue whether Ottoman audiences favored pawn promotions over flashy queen sacrifices because they mirrored social mobility myths. Some text him, the little stone that learns to rule. You feel yourself rooting for that stone. Come on, kid, almost there. The proprietor appears with a single slice of watermelon chilled on yet more hoarded snow, seeds already removed. Ultimate gesture of hospitality. You bite. Sweetness floods your mouth like summer declaring a truce with tired brains. Rind crunch echoes the bishop's path. Crisp, straightforward, refreshingly final. Light outside dims a shade. Ruby lantern reflections deepen. The water clock's drip now syncs with your slower pulse. You realize caffeine's edge has eased into a mellow plateau. Perhaps evening coffee will rekindle sparks, but for now you float in a syrup-cooled fugue, observing knights and pawns with benevolent detachment, content to let destiny idle in second gear. Piece by piece, hour by hour, the match inches toward resolution. Yet no one speaks of endings, only of the next sip, the next breeze, the next gilded swirl of ink. You lean back, stroke the cat's downy ears, and feel the empire's slow heartbeat thrum through every floorboard. There's nowhere else you need to be. The story is still writing itself, one apricot, one bishop, one patient breath at a time. Evening sidles into the Coffeehouse the way a librarian closes a door. Quiet hinge, soft click, instant hush. Outside, the sky bleeds pomegranate and plum, but inside, ruby lanterns already glow like captured hearth embers, tinting every porcelain cup the color of twilight secrets. You sip the last melt of your watermelon slice, the chilled snow now only a cool ghost on your tongue, and notice the proprietor wheeling in a hefty brass brazier shaped like a lion cub. The brazier's mouth coughs a single spark, then settles into a low, steady purr. Perfect backdrop for the slow crescendo of chess pieces waiting to exhale. Joke 1 adjusts its fez and notes that if fireplaces could purr, most cats would file for copyright infringement. The apprentice announces the next liquid chapter. Demerindi Sherbet, a tangy tamarind brew mulled with clove, ginger, and an admittedly overconfident pinch of black pepper. He pours the mahogany drink high so the stream sings against the cup, releasing spiced steam that clears sinuses you didn't know were clogged. Mainstream historical fact floats with that spice cloud. Ottoman physicians championed Demerindi as the ultimate digestive reset after large communal dinners, and palace kitchens kept barrels of concentrate ready for visiting envoys who couldn't handle local feasts. You inhale, sip, and feel internal gears creak back into optimistic alignment. Eyes drift to the chessboard. Spectacles Knight crouches like a rebellious goat halfway across the elder's territory, while the Basil elder's pawn, our little stone with big dreams, now stands just one brave step from the promotion row, trembling under the gaze of a pearl-white bishop. The Janissary updates odds for first checkmate before moonrise, scribbling one figure so large it wraps around the lid twice, then shrugs as if to say hope is more fun than accuracy. A quirky tidbit sidles up. Some 18th century cafes reportedly hired moon announcers to declare the exact moment the orb peaked over Galata Tower, giving patrons a romantic deadline for finishing games. Tonight, The sky looks clear. You sense your pawn feels the pressure. A gust rustles the reed blinds, bringing music from the street. A trio of players coaxing a slow 9/8 rhythm from clarinet and darbuka. Their melody slinks through the shutters, merging with the water clock drip until the entire room pulses like a single, lazy heartbeat. Historians still argue whether such street performances were tolerated by sultans for boosting civic morale or merely ignored because they, too, moved at an Ottoman-approved pace. Either way, every patron's sandal taps the floor in halftime, turning the kavahane into a subtle percussion at a nearby table. A dandy with a mustache so wide it could double as a balcony unfurls a velvet pouch and removes a silver mustache spoon, a utensil bent outward to protect facial hair from hot drinks. Joke 2 twirls the spoon like a baton and whispers that modern influencers would sell their ring lights to patent that level of brand commitment. The dandy dips the spoon into demerindi, sips elegantly, and nods as though his mustache just passed a swimming test. Back at the board, Spectacles pinches his temples, then shifts his queen 1 square, tightening a noose you hadn't noticed around the elder's bishop. Gasps flutter. The poets collectively exhale a syllable that rhymes with O. The elder, unflustered, rotates his obsidian ring counterclockwise, first time all day, and strokes the amber bead. You lean forward, certain ritual gravity is about to tilt. He lifts the rook guarding our ambitious pawn, slides it diagonally to intercept the queen's glare, and parks it with a thunk soft as a lullaby drum. Applause hums under breaths. Someone mutters that cypress trees envy such poise. The calligrapher, gold work done, dusts excess flecks onto a sheet of scrap parchment. Rather than discard, he folds the shiny waste into tiny origami boats and sets them afloat in a shallow basin of water near the window. You watch flecks twinkle like dwarf constellations adrift. Mainstream fact chimes in. Ottoman children's games often recycled workshop scraps. Silk shredded into kite tails, paper offcuts into boat races along gutter streams. Tonight, those miniature boats look like they're ferrying wishes toward the Bosphorus. Outside, a bell clangs twice. The lamplighter, or Sarasai, begins his circuit, sparking wicks along the alley. His pole flashes through slats, and each new flame paints shifting patterns on the coffeehouse ceiling. Historians still argue whether lamplighters carried gossip from cafe to cafe or whether they were too busy racing sunset. Folkloric ballads claim they knew every scandal before ink dried on court registers. You picture tonight's lamplighter scribbling match stats on his route, whispering, "The pawn's almost king. Stay tuned." Heat from the brazier braids with tamarind spice, coaxing a mild sweat along your hairline. The proprietors produce small cotton towels sprinkled with rosewater and lavender. "Even emperors dabbed," he jokes, handing you one. You press the cloth to your cheeks. Chill and floral notes soothe nerves you didn't realize were wired. Joke 3 slides by wearing a towel cape, announcing that if office break rooms offered lavender compresses, nobody would rage quit spreadsheets ever again. Focus returns to the board just as the elder's pawn, at long last, advances to the 8th rank. You hear your own breath catch. Even the cat's tail freezes mid-sweep. According to house rules, the pawn becomes a queen, but remembering Ottoman tradition, the elder swaps it for a vizier piece from a side pouch, shorter than a queen, topped with a turban rather than crown. The crowd murmurs approval of this nod to ancestry. Your chest sparkles with second-hand pride, as though you, too, just earned a silk turban for steadfastness. Spectacles, perhaps rattled by this historical flourish, attempts a counter but brushes 2 pieces at once. A minor breach. The janissary rings a brass fingerbell, invoking the wandering hand penalty. A single coin migrates from Spectacles' pile into the elder's. No protest. Rules are rules, and slow play demands deliberate grace. Night finally settles. Through the open door you see Galata's silhouette crowned with the tiniest silver comma of moon. Inside, lanterns multiply, ruby merging with sapphire glass until walls flicker like stained glass aquariums. The music outside fades, replaced by distant rowers chanting in unison, oars chopping starlit water. You taste tamarind's lingering tang, breathe sandalwood, and realize fatigue now feels less like heaviness and more like gentle gravity pulling you toward dreams. The cat curls beside your hip, vibrating a purr that syncs with the water clock. You stroke her fur once, Glance at the board. Vizier poised, queen wary, knights coiled. And accept that the game may push on into true night. But that's fine. Every lantern lit is another promise of story time. Every sip of Demerindi another stanza in this lullaby for grown-ups. You settle deeper into cushions, letting eyelids slip to half-mast, content to drift on the spiced breeze while strategy unfolds at a pace even moonlight can't rush. Somewhere across the city, clocks tick. Here, only hearts and pawns keep time. Unhurried, precise, kind. Moonrise matures into full night, a silver disk now high enough to spill lattice-shaped shadows over the kilim like quiet sheet music. The lamplighter's last torch fades at the alley's bend, and the Coffeehouse feels sealed inside a snow globe of ruby, sapphire, and soft tin lantern light. You rotate your spine, hearing a polite crack, and let the tamarind warmth settle deeper in your chest. Joke one strolls in wearing night watch epaulets. You tell yourself that single vertebra pop was applause from your skeleton for staying awake this long. Across the board, Spectacle's queen gleams beneath the lantern halo, mirrored by the elder's newly crowned vizier sporting its modest turban. A crescent of spectators leans forward, silk brokers, the mustache spoon dandy, even the juggler clutching his last intact lemon, as if gravity itself now issues from 32 chess squares. A mainstream historical fact drifts by like incense. In 17th-century court matches, chroniclers sometimes recorded each move in 2 inks, black for anticipated strategies, red for surprises, creating manuscripts that read like duets between order and serendipity. You picture tonight's scribe somewhere in the rafters, frantically switching quills every other turn. Spectacles inhales the sandalwood-tinged air, then nudges his knight sideways, leaving the vizier in apparent peace. The janissary, eyebrow arched, taps a lid labeled False Truce, sliding a tulip bulb into the elder's pile to acknowledge psychological warfare. You grin. Remember the tulip cannons on that mischievous tapestry? Somewhere the embroidered squirrel probably cheers for any tactic involving flowers. The apprentice glides past carrying slender porcelain dishes of mollop-dusted almonds, a midnight pick-me-up once reserved for caravan guards. He tips a handful onto your saucer. They taste like cherry blossoms married to campfire smoke. Quirky tidbit. A surviving ledger from Bursa lists almond rations for chess vigils, suggesting grandmasters claimed hazard pay for late-night calorie burn. Though skeptics insist they just loved snacks with poetic backstories. You crunch in solidarity, crumbs joining the archaeological layer of sesame seeds at your feet. The cat, sensing nut aromas, abandons her crescent nest and pads toward Spectacles, tail drawing languid calligraphy in the air. She circles his boots twice, then curls near the water clock where drops still fall. Slower now, as if the mechanism dozes mid-task. Historians still argue whether such clepsydras were intentionally set to decelerate after sundown, encouraging patrons to lose track of earthly schedules, or whether clogged reeds simply gave time a tired wheeze. Either way, you and the cat share a conspiratorial shrug. Works for us. Outside, an oarsman's chant filters through shutters. Long call, short reply, long call like a heartbeat echoing from the Bosphorus. The rhythm wraps around the Coffeehouse, layering under the nightingale's earlier solo. Joke 2 arrives dressed as a conductor, remarking that even the sea seems to conduct an orchestra just so pawns march on cue. You notice the calligrapher setting aside his basin of paper boats. He now extracts a vial of indigo ink and begins sketching the cat's silhouette directly onto a napkin. For posterity, he murmurs. A scholar beside him mutters that future curators will puzzle over feline portraits in gastronomic margins. That sparks the open debate phrase. Historians still argue whether coffeehouse art was spontaneous folk expression or covert social commentary disguised as doodles. You side with option 3, a stylish excuse to procrastinate bedtime. Back at the board, the Basil elder strokes his ring clockwise again. Balance restored and advances a bishop, pinning one of Spectacle's pawns against the edge. The move seems modest until you trace its ripple and realize it clears the vizier's lane straight toward the enemy king. A hush thicker than tamarind syrup settles. Even the almonds pause mid-air, reconsidering gravity. Spectacles tightens his turban cord, squints through silver loops, and shifts his rook 2 squares, erecting a barricade. The janissary records emergency fortification in charcoal shorthand. Odds wobble like drunk pigeons, coins skating across lids. You sip Demerindi again, pepper warmth blooming in your sinuses, and recognize this late-hour clarity. Every piece now behaves like a line of poetry searching for the perfect final syllable. The proprietor, reading the room's collective heartbeat, dims the central lantern a whisper. Glass panes throw star-shaped glimmers onto mother-of-pearl squares, turning the board into a night sky where ivory constellations hunt ebony shadows. You feel the metaphor stretch. Remember the amber bead? It catches a stray glint, pulsing like a comet frozen in resin. Joke 3 tiptoes on cosmic slippers. You decide if astronomy textbooks replaced constellations with chess layouts, stargazing parties would include snack tables and far fewer neck cramps. A sudden gust rattles shutters. With it comes a faint cinnamon scent from a baker firing ovens for pre-dawn simmet. The poets perk up, slide fresh verses into their epic. Night's kiln bakes dawn's slash in rings of seed and song. They high-five quietly. You recall goat hair coffee sacks, basil behind ears, fennel seeds chewed for focus, threads weaving tonight into the same expansive tapestry. Spectacles, perhaps emboldened by the smell of breakfast in the wind, lifts his queen for a decisive sortie, then freezes as the cat emits a perfectly timed sneeze. Laughter ripples. Tension cracks like thin ice. He bows to the feline referee, sets the queen back, and instead mobilizes a pawn, a conservative pivot that draws polite clapping from the mustache-spoon dandy. The janissary adjusts lids, scribbling, feline intervention clause enacted. No penalty. Midnight creeps closer. Lanterns sputter, reawaken, sputter again. Tiny adrenaline shots for the room. You roll an almond between teeth. Observe the vizier advance another stealthy step under bishop escort. Only 2 squares remain between strategy and check. You sense the endgame unfurling like slow parchment, though experience warns that end here could still mean another moon's arc outside. Clouds herd across the silver disk, dimming ambient light until the only glow comes from lanterns and scattered braziers along the lane. You nestle deeper into cushions. Fabric smells of old cardamom and new sandalwood. The water clock drops once, twice, then seems to hold its breath, mirroring your own as you wait for Spectacle's reply. He closes eyes briefly, perhaps consulting invisible advisors. Maybe that nightingale's song, maybe the memory of time honey sweetness. When his lids lift, resolve flashes. He repositions his remaining bishop to mirror the elders, creating an X of converging threat lines that slice the board into quadrants of suspense. The crowd leans so far forward cushions squeak like tiny violins. You realize you haven't blinked. Your eyes feel glazed like simmet rings. Finally you blink, and in that micro-darkness accept that no blanket, no lullaby, no flame flicker rivals the hypnotic gravity of slow, deliberate play. The elder's fingers hover over the vizier. 1 move could open check, 2 might sculpt mate. Will he seize the line or let tension age like pomegranate wine? The apprentice appears beside you with a tiny cup of plain water. No spice, no fruit, just simplicity, reminding you that even amidst tamarind swirls, basics sustain vigilance. You drink, cool clarity settling in, and ready yourself. The next square might end a saga begun before sunset, or launch a new chapter stretching to rooster crow. Either way, you're here for it. Bones applauding in quiet pops, taste buds cataloging midnight flavors, pulse syncing with a clock that dares dream slower than stars drift across Ottoman skies. Midnight finally uncloaks itself in full, wrapping the Coffeehouse in velvet stillness broken only by the soft sigh of the brazier and the occasional creak of an overworked cushion. You stretch your ankle, brushing the kilim pattern shaped like tiny tulips. Yes, the same blossoms marching across the mischievous cannon tapestry, and feel the warm will answer with a reassuring scratch. Joke 1 wakes up wielding a feather quill. You consider commissioning the rug to co-author your future memoir, title pending, chapter length negotiable. Spectacles and the Basil Elder hover over their galaxy of ebony and pearl, each man a statue carved from patience. You catch the faintest tremor in Spectacle's fingertips. His queen remains poised in that X-shaped web of bishops, while the elder's turban-crowned vizier lurks 2 squares from glory. A mainstream historical fact glides between lantern shadows. Ottoman viziers held the Sultan's imperial seal, able to rule in his absence. On a chessboard, the namesake piece borrows that gravitas, shorter than a queen yet steeped in bureaucratic swagger. Tonight's bureaucratic swagger arrives in liquid form. The apprentice reappears balancing a narrow copper cezve filled with meningic, pistachio coffee, roasted from wild terebinth beans. He pours you a cup the color of burnished jade, foam frothing like miniature cumulus clouds. You inhale. The aroma recalls pine forests after rain, sharp yet soothing, utterly different from the thunderous Yemeni brew that began your odyssey. A quirky tidbit tags along with the steam. Caravan folklore insists meningic can ward off scorpion stings if gulped before sunrise, though skeptics contend surviving the taste test is proof enough of hardiness. You swallow, delicious, and decide you're now 60% more resistant to hypothetical insects. Across the room, the reed flute poet sets his instrument aside to produce a saz, its long neck resembling a moonlit minaret. He plucks a slow Mockham's in Hikaz mode, melancholic, wandering, suitable for late-night revelations and, perhaps, decisive moves. Historians still argue whether certain Mockham's were reserved for royal chess bouts, each scale nudging players toward boldness or restraint. Surviving court journals are maddeningly vague, noting only string mood, appropriate. You smile, letting the music braid through sandalwood curls, meningic pine, and lingering Demerindi spice. Focus returns to the board. Spectacles, perhaps coaxed by the saz's minor inflections, pushes a pawn one step as a feint, opening a diagonal that threatens the vizier if, and only if, the elder grows reckless. The Janissary records sly drizzle in his odds ledger, sliding a coin that rings like impatient thunder. Joke 2 slides across the tiles wearing rain boots. You imagine meteorologists issuing pawn-shaped drizzle warnings, 30% chance of minor positional showers after midnight. The proprietor dims lanterns by a finger's width, ushering the room into a cozy submarine of jewel-toned half-light. Mother-of-pearl squares now glow like distant constellations, each reflecting a lantern's ruby pupil. You remember the calligrapher's paper boats and wonder if they've already sailed out the open window, carrying gold-flecked wishes into the strait. Perhaps a passing dolphin will critique their penmanship. Stranger reviews have happened tonight. Your meningic cup sits only half-emptied when the mustache-spoon dandy clears his throat and recites an impromptu quatrain comparing foam bubbles to caravans of lost dreams. The poets applaud. The silk brokers snap abacus beads in sync, as though underwriting the poem's meter. The cat, uninterested in literary futures, returns to her water clock perch and takes a dignified sip from the drip bowl. Hydration, apparently, outranks verse. Back at center stage, the elder finally wraps thumb and forefinger around his vizier. You watch, not breathing, as he lifts the piece, moving so slowly the wax on the nearest lantern seems to melt in solidarity. He lowers the vizier one deliberate square. Check. A rustle sweeps the spectators, part gasp, part prayer, part suppressed cheer. Yet the move lacks finality. Spectacles King still has a narrow escape corridor, flanked by that newly advanced pawn. Spectacles leans back, exhaling through pursed lips. He reaches into his robe and retrieves a small phial of attar, dabbing rose essence onto his temples. A sensory pep talk. Joke 3 unfurls like a perfumed scroll. You imagine modern chess grandmasters adopting mandatory fragrance breaks. Game paused, Magnus spritzing bergamot. Inhale deeply. The rose attar marries pine meningic, forming an aroma you label midnight garden after rain. Patent pending, chess tension tightens. Spectacles must choose. Interpose his rook, sidestep the king, or gamble on a countercheck. His eyes flick to the feline referee. The cat blinks twice, unreadable. At the same moment, the water clock releases a single echoing drop, the first in almost 2 minutes, punctuating decision time like a gong muffled in velvet that he moves. The rook slides sideways, shielding the king and simultaneously targeting the vizier. Clever, but the block sacrifices initiative. The elder can now marshal his bishop brigade. You recall the squirrel-driven tulip cannons and grin. Every siege needs artillery. The elder rotates his obsidian ring counterclockwise, indicating offense, then glides a bishop along the diagonal, pinning Spectacles' rook to his monarch. A subtle, almost whispered melts from the crowd. The mustache dandy's spoon quivers in applause. This might be the throat clearing before mate. Yet tradition demands dignity. No fist pumps, no taunts, only measured sips and quiet admiration. You follow suit, finishing your meningic in a single swallow that leaves resinous embers on your palate. A breeze slips through shutters, fluttering indigo cord tassels. Outside, waves lap stone keys with lullaby persistence. The apprentice returns, offering a final plate of sujuk-spiced chickpeas roasted to crunchy perfection. A snack believed to keep sentries awake without overpowering the nerves. You pop one, marvel at the smoky heat, and count 8 distinct spices. Quirky callback. Remember goat hair coffee sacks? Legend says early spice traders packed chickpeas in the same sacks, believing the fibers imbued the legumes with extra fire. You crunch another for scientific confirmation. Verdict: myth deliciously unbroken. Spectacles now wipes his spectacles. Pun encore, then rotates his queen 3 squares, attempting a desperate counter-battery aimed at the elder's back rank. The Janissary taps his ledger under Moon Gambit, scribbling exclamation points shaped like tiny scimitars. Historians still argue whether such last-ditch swerves were celebrated as heroic or pitted as inevitable tragedy. Interpretation usually depended on how many pastries remained to soothe the loser. Speaking of which, the proprietor quietly slides a tray of almond cinnamon helva into the room, sugar crystals catching lantern light like soft fireworks, insurance against the sting of imminent defeat. The elder studies the board, eyes gleaming in ruby reflections. 1 bishop, 1 vizier, 1 amber-glinting rook, all choreographed toward a single corridor. You sense the moment before it happens, like the hush just prior to a storyteller's final sentence. He lifts the bishop, floats it along the starlit diagonal, and lands square on G7. Checkmate. At a soundless explosion of relief sweeps the Kavahane. Exhalations, soft claps, spoon taps, abacus rattles, even the cat's tail thumps once in royal acknowledgement. Spectacles smiles, palms pressed together in salam, accepting fate with grace that would impress even that squirrel artillery commander. The Janissary's lids clatter as he disperses winnings. Coins, tulip bulbs, a single dented saffron vial, and notes "Moonrise Mate" in bold charcoal across the ledger's top. You sit back, heart fluttering like a fledgling sparrow, then settle into the afterglow of accomplishment you didn't earn but absolutely feel. 30-plus hours of slow theater culminated in a whisper of ebony against pearl. Joke 4 tries to sneak in, but you gently flick its ear. Quotas matter, even amid victorious fireworks. Instead, you sip plain water, savor chickpeas, and let the scene reduce to ember warmth, says chords, and the knowledge that patience built a kingdom tonight, 1 cautious square at a time. You hardly notice when the apprentice clears the finished board and, with a reverent hush, resets the pearls and ebonies for a rematch. Apparently, night inside this Kavahane comes with unlimited extra lives. You flex your wrists, feeling the ghost of tension that just evaporated after checkmate, and watch Spectacles roll his shoulders as if shaking off old dust. Joke 1 slips on stage wearing tiny referee stripes. You suspect he's secretly grateful the first game ended, because even Spectacles need a chance to blink. The proprietors light 2 additional glass lamps, 1 emerald, 1 amber, so the pieces gleam like beetles under moonlit leaves. A mainstream historical fact sidles up beside the glow. Travelers once described Ottoman cafes as lantern gardens, claiming the colored glass served as a poor man's stained glass window whenever mosques were closed. Here and now, the phrase feels perfectly literal. Green and gold mosaics prance across the kilim, turning each cushion into a patch of jungle. Spectacles wins the toss and opens with the king's pawn, a daring burst of speed by local standards. The Basil elder replies symmetrically, the tiniest smile curling his mustache, and you feel the room inhale. Fresh canvas, fresh intrigues. Outside, the Bosphorus answers with a low rolling sigh, as though the sea also approves new beginnings. Historians still argue whether night games bred more experimental openings than daylight bouts. Some notebooks boast diagrams nobody can decipher because sleep deprivation turned bishops into fish. You've witnessed weirder things tonight than aquatic archbishops, so you accept the theory. Halfway across the room, the cat executes a luxurious stretch, then strolls across the windowsill to inspect the sky. Clouds herd past the half-moon like sheep yards after curfew, and the lamplighter trudges below, dousing torches he lit only an hour earlier. Apparently city economy insists on one man to kindle hope and another to tuck it in. A quirky tidbit drifts on his lantern smoke. Lamplighters sometimes carried pet finches in tiny cages. If the bird dozed, the lamplighter deemed the street safe from pickpockets. No song, no trouble. You study tonight's man, no bird. Maybe crime has the night off too. Back inside, the poets present a new challenge. Every capture must trigger a rhymed couplet on the spot. Everyone agrees, except the juggler, who claims he only rhymes with citrus. Joke 2 hands him a lemon in silent encouragement. The juggler juggles it once, twice, and rhymes bishop with drip sip, earning mild applause and a seed of credibility. You sip Menengique's piney afterglow still clinging to your tongue when a fresh aroma sneaks up. Saffron milk simmered with threads of mastic. The apprentice appears balancing bowls the color of sunrise. He explains it's Horaz Sutu, rooster's milk, named for the hour when even roosters become imaginary. You taste, and liquid velvet drapes your throat, chasing away the pistachio resin. Joke 3 pops up wearing feathered pajamas. You decide if roosters actually produced milk, mornings would involve far fewer alarms and far more cappuccinos. On the board, pieces glide with a tempo that feels fractionally brisker. Still snailish by modern clocks, but enough that the water clock quickens its drip as if inspired. The elder castles long, tucking his king behind a new minaret-shaped rook. Spectacles counters with an audacious queen sortie that threatens the basil elder's knight. Those silver loops near his eyes flash, catching emerald lampfire like twin comets. You shift forward, elbows seeking purchase on velvet, ready for another slow-motion fireworks show. Above you, lantern shadows weave fresh choreography across the ceiling beams, merging occasionally with soot ghosts left by centuries of smoke. The calligrapher, never idle, dabs his reed pen into a new pot of indigo and sketches tiny silhouettes of each chess piece in order of appearance, as though composing a dance notation. He pauses, frowns, then adds the cat lounging on the sill. Every ballet needs its prima donna, spectacles queen claims a pawn with decisive grace. Instantly, the poets fulfill their oath. Her Majesty doth dine on stone. / 1 square closer to his throne. Scans barely, but the room approves. The elder lifts a bishop in response, sliding it to pin the offending monarch against an advancing pawn. Historians still argue whether bishops here served more as clergy or covert border guards. You recall from dusty footnotes. Tonight, the piece feels like both, sprinkling incense over the queen's escape routes while brandishing a ceremonial sword. The juggler, inspired, tosses 3 glowing embers from the brazier lid. A reckless stunt that draws a sharp hiss from the proprietor and a muffled gasp from you. Embers land safely back on metal and he bows. Maybe citrus rhymes aren't his only party trick. A breeze sneaks through reed slats, fluttering the napkin where the cat's silhouette dries. Ink scent mingles with saffron steam, sandalwood ash, and trace rose attar from earlier dab sessions. You realize this air could be bottled and sold as Nocturne of Patience. But only if a customer promised to open it slowly. Spectacles leans back, studying the pin. He considers, then nudges a knight in a looping arc, forking the bishop and threatening the long-castled fortress. A collective murmur rises. The janissary's lids rattle. He scribbles forked lullaby and adjusts odds to favor drama. You crunch another sujuk chickpea and brace for the elder's countermove. Instead of pieces, the elder lifts the amber bead, rolling it between fingers as if consulting an oracle. After a heartbeat, he sets it beside the pinned queen. Pure theatrics, but the gesture plants doubt. He then slides his vizier 3 squares, aligning it with spectacles rook along an emerald-lit file. Pressure mounts, quiet yet unrelenting, like silk being twisted into rope. Outside, distant drums announce a fishing boat prepping nets at the mouth of the Golden Horn. Their dull thump pulses through stone walls, twin heartbeat to the water clock's drip. Joke 1's cousin sneaks back, quipping that between drips, thumps, clacks, and purrs, you've unofficially enrolled in the Empire's most complex metronome lesson. A mainstream fact reminds you fishermen often drank strong salep before pre-dawn launches, claiming the orchid root steadied sea legs. Perhaps tomorrow, these very cups will sail across docks, fueling another slow epic on a rocking deck. Inside, Spectacles lifts his rook, contemplates, then reholsters it, opting instead for a modest pawn advance that stiffens his center. You admire the restraint. Even the poets abstain from couplets, sensing heavy strategy in silence. Lantern light gleams across board edges, and you find yourself mesmerized by how each square absorbs color. Pearl reflecting gold, ebony swallowing green, together mapping a nocturnal city you suddenly crave to explore. But exploration can wait. Another saffron sip, another water clock drop, another sea drum. You settle back, realizing dawn is far off, yet you're perfectly content to orbit these slow suns of lampglass and resign yourself to whatever hour the next checkmate chooses. Patience, after all, just proved itself the best storyteller in Istanbul. The water clock hiccups a little faster now, as though it, too, senses the hush just before dawn's first violet bruise appears on the horizon. You flex your fingers, tracing the faint heat the brazier breathes across the pearl squares, and notice a new lantern, cobalt glass, swinging from a ceiling hook you could swear was empty moments ago. Joke 1 wanders in wearing an invisible cloak. You wonder whether lanterns reproduce by budding when the room's ambience feels underlit. The newly reset game has eased into its middle phase. Pawns have shuffled into half-built ramparts, knights lurk like sleepy watchdogs, and the Basil Elder's vizier piece, back in service straight from its recent triumph, now pauses behind a modest pawn phalanx, waiting for a fresh excuse to rewrite the balance sheet. Spectacles Queen hovers opposite, silver loops on his glasses catching cobalt glimmers that flicker every time he tilts his head. A mainstream historical fact strolls in, towel over its shoulder. By the early 18th century, Ottoman coffeehouses sometimes doubled as shadow play theaters. The boards cleared away so Karagöz's puppets could parade against white linens. Tonight, the only puppets are these 32 figurines, but you can almost see invisible strings tugging at rook elbows while the players feign effortless calm. Outside, a rooster crows too early, then apparently realizes his mistake and clucks himself into embarrassed silence. The poet sees the moment to craft a stanza about the bird who mistimed tomorrow, but one rhymes rooster with youth booster, and the room groans in unison. Joke 2 gives the poet a consoling pat. You murmur that every pun deserves at least a participation ribbon, preferably in a distant province. Spectacles advances a pawn, and the elder mirrors it. Wooden taps echo like raindrops on a tiled courtyard. The cat launches a yawn so wide you glimpse every last tooth, then kneads the window cushion, rearranging moon shadows into her personal topography. You raise your cup for another sip of Rooster's Milk saffron brew, but the apprentice intercepts, announcing an even rarer specialty, ostrich egg cave, thickened with ground pistachio and slow-cooked within the cleaned shell over embers. A quirky tidbit accompanies the drink. Some desert caravans allegedly packed ostrich eggs not for meals but as portable kettles. Heat, brew, crack, and enjoy. Skeptics claim the story hatched in a storyteller's nest. Still, the apprentice presents a porcelain bowl of velvety, faintly nutty coffee, and it definitely tastes like something that once required feathers. Across the aisle, the mustache spoon dandy produces another eccentric implement, a crescent-shaped toothpick, declaring that residue from prized midnight brews must be honored, not merely scraped. He polishes a molar with ceremony normally reserved for treaty signings. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans popularized ornate dental tools to match lavish table service or whether enterprising metalworkers simply needed fresh markets after tulip speculation crashed. The debate drifts while you secretly decide both capitalism and cavities can share the blame. The game tilts. Spectacles thrusts a knight into enemy territory, forking vizier and rook. A rustle ripples around benches. The Janissary sketches Fork of Dawn across his bedding lid, pushing 2 dented tulip bulbs into a new column. Yet the Basil Elder barely blinks. He slides his rook to safety and, in the same breath, unveils a bishop that suddenly diagrams a long, lethal diagonal. You track the line and realize the knight's landing square is now scorched earth. Joke 3 adjusts its monocle. You decide the only thing riskier than a knight fork is eating soup in a moving gondola. Both seem elegant until gravity clears its throat that a lull settles, the sort that invites micro-dreams to tiptoe across eyelids. You let yours drift. A vision of Karagöz's puppets replacing pawns, wielding tiny scimitars while reciting coffee recipes. A drop in the water clock jerks you back. The cat's tail taps your ankle as if checking you're still on the spectator payroll. The apprentice reappears with a reed censer, wafting powdered myrrh said to quiet fidgety spirits. The fragrance folds into the saffron mastic steam already curling near the ceiling. A mainstream fact floats through the haze. City edicts once banned overly pungent incenses lest they overpower neighborhood bakers' dawn sales pitch. Violators paid fines in cinnamon sticks. You inhale, this blend is more lullaby than riot, so no constables burst in. Pieces resume their dance. The vizier shuffles behind a pawn wall, planning retribution. Spectacles queen sidesteps in wary circles. Lantern light dims again, coaxing the board's mother of pearl to moon glow. The calligrapher, eyes half closed, now sketches overlapping spirals in the notebook margin where pawns just battled. A hypnotic shorthand for tension unresolved, another rooster. Probably the first bird's competitive cousin. Let's fly a tentative crow. This time the room murmurs approval. False dawn or not, it signals survival through yet one more circle of night. The poets clap softly, compose a haiku on the spot, and the juggler tosses a last ember skyward to punctuate their syllables before catching it bare-handed with a theatrical hiss. Spectacles finally breaks the gridlock. He swings his queen along a fresh file, delivering check, but not a lethal one. More a test tap on the elder's defenses. The basil elder counters by lifting the amber bead, pressing it to his forehead like a chilled tonic, then advances a humble pawn that simultaneously blocks check and unveils a hidden rook battery. Countercheck shimmers in the air, unspoken but obvious. Gasps Bloom. The Janissary scrawls Amber Gambit, scratches out the question mark on Fork of Dawn, and resets odds yet again. You sip the last of your ostrich egg coffee. Foam clings to the cup like an unexplored continent. Sleep edges closer, heavy and persuasive, but curiosity still tugs at your collar. Which line will snap first? Spectacles' daring offense or the elder's layered patience? Outside, boat drums hush, replaced by faint imam practice scales. The pre-adhan warm-up that only insomniacs and chess marathons hear. You note the melody's gentle resolve. No leap, no flourish, just sustained tones that reconcile night with the promise of dawn. The same reconciliation plays out over Mother of Pearl. Risk pressing against caution, silver versus amber, rook bars meeting vizier keys. The cat turns one last slow circle and settles again, eyes half shut yet alert. You mimic her posture. Back straight, eyelids heavy, spirit hovering between watchfulness and dream. If the match decides itself in darkness, you trust the cat will wake you. If dawn barges in first, you'll greet it with saffron on your breath and stories braided from midnight pine. For now, the pieces hold their positions, lantern glows fuse into quiet constellations overhead, and the water clock releases a final, deliberate drop, pronouncing the stanza complete though the poem lingers. You nestle deeper into cushion lore and exhale, ready for whatever sleepy miracle the next square will offer. A faint silver rim of pre-dawn hovers somewhere beyond the shutters, but inside the Kavahane the night holds fast, unwilling to surrender its velvet authority. You shift your weight, feeling the cushions remember every contour of your body, and notice the new cobalt lantern dipping lazy shadows across the ceiling. Proof that ambience multiplies when no one's looking. Joke 1 slips out wearing a tiny miner's helmet. Apparently lanterns are downlighting this place like it's digging for more midnight on the board. Spectacles finally breaks the stalemate of thought, sliding his knight behind a screen of pawns where it waits like a cat poised to pounce on invisible string. The basil elder counters by inching his vizier sideways, turbaned head gleaming beneath the lantern glow. The move looks modest, but you spot the diagonal trap it sets. Remember how that bishop battery finished the last game? Déjà vu, but with fresh embroidery. A mainstream historical fact nudges your memory. By 1630, Sultan Murad for briefly outlawed coffee, claiming it fueled seditious chatter. Rebels simply played slower and sipped in back alleys, proving that banning beans is like forbidding dawn. The irony hangs thick as cardamom steam. Centuries later, you're here in flagrant defiance, letting caffeine choreograph your heartbeat. The apprentice tiptoes by with a reed tray of candied orange peels dusted in pistachio. He offers one, explaining their sunrise practice for taste buds. You bite. Citrus sparks across your tongue. Coaxing eyelids open another hour. A quirky tidbit drifts by. Certain night owl players tucked orange peels under their turbans, insisting the scent kept ideas orbiting instead of crashing. You resist headgear aromatherapy but pocket appeal for science. Pieces shuffle. The cat flicks her tail, unimpressed by human drama. She hops onto the empty chair beside you, needing a seat that long ago surrendered to wear. Joke 2 arrives twirling a feather quill. You consider hiring the cat as an ergonomic consultant. Her first recommendation clearly involves adding more laps. Spectacles adjusts the silver loops of his spectacles, exhaling through pursed lips. He touches his queen, pauses. Touch move rule stares back. Then commits, gliding her 3 squares to press along the newly opened file. Gasps ripple. The poets scramble for couplets, but the word queen refuses to rhyme politely at this hour. You watch the Janissary scribble early bird royal raid on his battered lid, sliding 2 cracked axes toward the sun beats check column. Outside, fishing skiffs clang their mooring bells, and gulls rehearse breakfast complaints. The door cracks open long enough for a ribbon of sea chill to swirl sandalwood ash into tiny galaxies above the brazier. You inhale the briny note, and a memory surfaces. Goat hair coffee sacks whipping on docks at dusk, their fibers capturing salt just like this breath. Callbacks weave the tapestry tighter. The elder answers with a long diagonal bishop sortie, pinning spectacles forward pawn exactly where that knight dreamed of leaping. Historians still argue whether Ottoman masters favored these slow constrictor strategies because they mirrored siege warfare or because knightly patrons preferred suspense stretched like locum. You lean toward the locum theory. Sugar pairs beautifully with patience. The calligrapher, inspired by tension, sketches a spiral tighter than a cinnamon curl, labeling it thought coil. You notice the ink shines cobalt, borrowed from the newcomer lantern. Somewhere down the line, an archivist will puzzle over blue spirals in a weather log and blame humidity. Spectacles retreats into deep thought. The room echoes silence so pure you swear you hear the amber bead on the elder's ring humming. The apprentice fills the hush with fresh meningic foam, pouring from a long-spouted ibrick that arcs liquid jade into cups without spilling a single drop. Joke 3 slides in wearing a barista apron. If Olympic archery allowed coffee pour-overs, this kid would medal before the arrow left the bow. You sip. The pine resin note now follows candied citrus like forest after orchard. A gentle buzz lifts your fog, and when you refocus, the knight you'd lost sight of has jumped the pin, landing on a square that forks rook and vizier. Collective inhale. Then the cat sneezes, breaking the spell. Laughter rises, soft and grateful. Even crises cue politely here. The basil elder answers with calm surgical precision. Rook sidesteps, sacrificing a pawn to free the vizier. You notice that sacrificed pawn lands on a square still warm from the cat's earlier nap. Some fates are comfy even in doom. Spectacles captures, pocketing the pawn like a keepsake. Somewhere in the rafters an imaginary chronicler notes, small stone, big morale. Outside, the sky bruises lighter. Violet smudges toward peach at the edges of the shutters. The poets compose a haiku on the color change. Knight's ink thins to milk/pawns yawn under peach husk dawn/bishop's brace for light. You grant them approving silence. Syllables can't match what you see seeping through slats. Inside, strategy tilts again. The vizier slides opposite spectacles queen, eyes locking across pearly terrain. 2 power pieces share one file. You feel gravitational tension as real as the brazier's heat. The Janissary flips a tulip bulb, heads for queen victory, tails for vizier coup, and it lands on its point, balanced absurdly upright. He leaves it, superstition outranking odds that a final lamp is snuffed. Dawn's own glow begins filling cracks between lantern shadows. You taste the shift. Sandalwood fades. Dowy simit aromas ride the alley breeze. Somewhere a baker taps trays, metal on stone, the morning's percussion. Spectacles inhales, lifts his queen, and, in a move both brazen and poetic, offers a queen exchange in the center. The elder hesitates, turning the amber bead, thumb tracing the spiral graven there. He exhales, accepts, Pearl Queen meets Ebony Vizier. Twin pieces lifted in silent ceremony and set aside. Balance resets, board simplified, yet tension magnifies. With royalty gone, every humble piece must audition for heroism. You notice dawn light glancing off the mother of pearl, painting squares with opalescent blush. The cat blinks, deciding daylight is overrated, and tucks her head beneath a tail. Your own blink lingers. Fatigue unfurls a soft blanket over your sense of urgency. Outside, the first season stretches across rooftops, long vowels wrapping the neighborhood in silk. Inside, nobody moves. Even the water clock delays its next drop, honoring the call. When sound fades, the Basil elder reaches, lifts his bishop, and parks it square in spectacles half-empty back rank. Check. No fanfare, just truth whispered in wood. Spectacles still holds a rook and that dashing knight, but the geometry looks grim. He studies, sighs, then tips the edge of his king. Not fully fallen, just leaning, a courteous concession. Applause is hushed but heartfelt. Coins slide, lids clack, and the tulip bulb finally topples, declaring a sigh you exhale, surprised by relief and a tinge of loss. Another saga closed, another dawn conquered. Yet cushions under you remember every shape of victory, and the scent of fresh simmet already drifts through the doorway hinting at breakfast tales to come. The cat rolls onto her back, paws skyward, as if displaying the board's new vacancy. You reach to scratch her chin, and she purrs a promise. There will be more games, more night gardens of lantern light, more meningic forests and tamarind oceans. For now, you simply watch the day pour in, gentle as foam slipping off a copper spoon, and let the slowest hours of your life settle into satisfied stillness. Dawn keeps widening its rosy grin, slipping under shutters that no one bothers to close anymore. You stretch like dough beneath warm linen, feeling shoulders hum with the slow pride of surviving 2 overnight epics. The proprietor raises the reed blinds fully, and morning light floods the Cavahane in slanted waterfalls, turning the mother-of-pearl squares into opals and making every dust mote look like a drifting prayer. Joke one ambles in wearing oversized sunglasses, whispering that even specks of dust booked front-row seats for sunrise. Spectacles and the Basil elder exchange bows over the cleared board, then break into identical yawns. Proof that victory and defeat share the same basic choreography at 6 in the morning. The apprentice sweeps up captured pieces, polishes them with a cloth infused with rosewater, and lines them in a neat regiment along the counter to air out their feelings, as he puts it. A mainstream historical fact sidles beside the orderly parade. Ottoman coffeehouses often displayed notable fallen pieces on high shelves so regulars could point at them later and retell heroic blunders. In some districts, that shelf doubled as a community bulletin board where lost goats and found earrings shared space with checkmate diagrams. You inhale, expecting more meningic, but the apprentice surprises everyone by unveiling a ceramic cauldron of tarhana soup, tangy yogurt, and sun-dried vegetable crumble revived in simmering water. He ladles portions into earthenware bowls, each dollop crowned with a swirl of melted butter red with Aleppo pepper. The scent unfurls like a wool blanket fresh from a cedar chest. A quirky tidbit follows the steam. Shepherd folklore claims tarhana was invented when a forgotten yogurt sack fermented inside a saddlebag during a month-long migration. The resulting powder fed an entire encampment and one overly grateful wolf pup. You cradle the bowl, sip, and feel warmth glide down your spine like a friendly salamander hunting chill drafts. The cat materializes beneath your bench, drawn by butter fumes, and offers a polite head bump to your shin. You drop a breadcrumb streaked in paprika. She devours it, then curls around your ankle like an animated ankle bracelet. Joke 2 spins by twirling a soup spoon baton, announcing that security systems worldwide would be improved if they purred. Chairs scrape gently as the night's cast prepares for daytime roles. The mustache spoon dandy reties his sash, ensuring no rogue butter fleck endangers his facial headline. The juggler tucks embers into a sand pot to keep the rhythm going on his walk home. The silk brokers finalize yesterday's exchange rates, each bead click on the abacus sounding like a farewell semaphore. Historians still argue whether such dawn closings constituted an informal stock market bell or were merely survival instincts kicking players toward mattresses. Parchments disagree, mostly because their authors nodded off mid-sentence. The proprietor rings a tiny copper bell, single chime, signaling the start of breakfast service for commuters about to stumble in. He nods toward you, silently offering sanctuary for as long as you wish, but also acknowledging the tide of day will soon flood his lantern garden with fresh chatter. You return a slow nod, then glance at goat hair coffee sacks stacked near the hearth. New batch, new tags, Sumatran beans, beware stubborn fibers. Their fringe stands at attention like salt-crusted seagrass, reminding you of the empire-wide tango between trade and texture. Outside, vendors tune their cries. A Simit boy sprints past, spindle spinning like a Catherine wheel, sesame rings glittering in the sun. The poets, sleeves rolled to elbows, chase him out the door hoping to riff couplets on circular breakfasts. You hear them improvise, round as dawn, soft as yawn. Before their voices scatter down the lane, joke 3 hops on a bagel pun skateboard, whispering that poetry might have been invented solely to keep pastry sales robust. Back inside, Spectacles removes the lemon leaf from his pocket, wilted but fragrant, and presses it between 2 blank sheets of the calligrapher's paper. Memory needs perfume, he murmurs. The calligrapher obliges, adding a single indigo spiral above the leaf like a halo. You watch ink bloom and wonder how many invisible scents already rest between manuscript pages in libraries you'll never see. A burst of clove breeze rolls in as the door swings for a janissary changing guard. He pauses, salutes the proprietor with 2 fingers to brow, and downs a shot of Tarhana like a warrior quaffing courage. Mainstream fact number 2 arrives in his shadow. Frontier fort logs mention soldiers granted double rations of soured soup before long marches, the lactic tang believed to brace sinews against boredom. Judging by your newly warm toes, the theory holds. Sunlight now floods so fiercely that lantern glass appears pale. Emerald and cobalt hues fade into watery ghosts. The proprietor snuffs wicks with a tulip-shaped cap, one by one, letting smoke curls twist upward like retirees enjoying final stretches. The brazier coal dulls, releasing a sigh of ash. You exhale in sync, feeling internal gears downshift from nocturnal vigilance to dawn's gentler hum. The basil elder approaches, palm open, revealing the amber bead. He presses it into your hand, cool, surprisingly heavy, and says, "A night's patience deserves a daylight compass." You turn the bead. Sunlight drills through its honey core, igniting flecks that look like captured meteors. Historians still argue whether gifting talismans in coffeehouses served diplomatic, mystical, or simply sentimental purposes. Scrolls cite all 3, often in the same paragraph. You close fingers around the bead, accepting whichever motive glimmers brightest. The apprentice reappears with tiny bowls of cold water for finger rinsing. One last sensory ribbon before the curtain drops. You dip, feeling paprika oils swirl away, and watch droplets pepper the kilim, where tulip motifs have begun glowing in full daylight. A sudden urge to trace their outlines tugs at you. Perhaps tonight those flowers will cannon more embroidered petals at unwary newcomers. Voices outside swell, and footsteps clatter nearer. Fresh patrons bearing errands, gossip, and hunger. The proprietor smiles, half tired, half eager, and rearranges cushions so new backsides won't notice the indentations yours left. The cat gives a final purr, then vanishes under a bench, presumably clocking in for the day shift of crumb reconnaissance. You rise, legs tingling as blood reboots. Every joint pops like polite applause, the room acknowledging your graduation from spectator to survivor. You slip the amber bead into a pocket, savor one last soup sip, and step toward the door. Morning greets you with briny breeze, distant gull shouts, and sun motes pricked by sesame dust dancing off the Simit boy's basket. Turning back, you catch the proprietor already pouring coffee for a pair of porters. Spectacles and the elder lean over a fresh board debating opening lore. The calligrapher angles his page toward sunlight to gild the indigo halo. Life inside continues, a perpetual slow reel, proof that stories don't end. They only cycle through new witnesses. You inhale the mingled aromas, cardamom ghosts, pine menengic, lingering sandalwood, and pocket the orange peel you saved. Maybe you'll tuck it under a hat later, see if ideas keep orbiting. You step into the alley, feet crunching a stray chickpea, and feel dawn's warmth settle on your shoulders like the softest cloak. Ahead, the city sparkles. Rooftops, minarets, cargo masts, each offering its own board of possibilities. Behind, the Coffeehouse hums, promising another lantern garden when night falls. You walk on, pulse slow, heart light, guided by an amber compass shaped like patience, scented by oranges, and echoing with the memory of bishops gliding through lamplight toward checkmate. A new day yawns open, but you carry the hush of the slowest night, ready to unroll it whenever the world spins too fast. Sunlight keeps creeping through the lattice, stacking golden bricks across the kilim until the whole floor looks like a slow-built palace of morning. You shift your seat to keep toes inside one bright rectangle, instant foot heater, and hear the cat trill with envy from her cushioned throne. Joke one strolls in wearing sunblock and a beach towel, muttering that even in a coffeehouse, real estate is all about good lighting and low rent. Spectacles flicks a stray sesame seed off his lapel, eyes narrowing at the elder's newly advanced vizier. He answers with a night hop that lands startlingly close to the center, as if the horse woke from a nap and craved open pasture. The move draws a polite gasp from the mustache-spoon dandy, who fans himself with a lace handkerchief embroidered in, of all things, tiny chessboards. A mainstream historical fact drifts by on the scent of fresh cardamom. Travelogues from the 18th century describe foppish patrons carrying monogrammed game scarves to dab sweat during tense matches. Fashion historians still argue whether the trend started in Istanbul or pirouetted in from Venetian salons. Outside, hoofbeats echo, and a street sweeper's broom writes scratchy poetry across cobblestones. The city smells of horse leather, budding jasmine, and sawdust from a carpenter already planing planks for some afternoon stall. You sip what's left of your tarhana broth, now cooled to a tart yogurt breeze, and feel energy coil back inside tired muscles. Inside, the apprentice unveils a tiny glass dome containing locum infused with rose and black pepper. He calls them sunrise sparks. He sets the dish between players, and the candies shimmer like galaxies trapped in gelatin. Joke 2 arrives skating on powdered sugar, whispering that anyone brave enough to snack mid-endgame deserves hazard pay and mint dental floss. The elder ignores sugar temptation, choosing instead a slow bishop slide that aligns two diagonals like crossing fishing lines in the Bosphorus. Spectacles strokes the silver cords of his spectacles, pun evergreen, before countering with a pawn push that locks one line but opens another. Strategy today resembles weaving: thread, tug, pause, admire. The poets scribble comparisons to carpet looms, but their quills squeak so loudly that the calligrapher gifts them a vial of oil to hush the racket. A quirky tidbit wafts in with the oil scent. Some manuscript restorers swear squeaky reed pens predicted weather changes. When pens sang, rain danced within a day, or so they claim between sips of strong coffee. Skeptics label it nostalgia acoustics, yet you file the omen away. Any forecast is welcome when you've pulled an all-nighter on caffeine and folklore. The proprietor climbs a short ladder to dust a shelf of venerable cezves, each one stamped with a tiny crescent moon. You notice a gap where one pot should sit. He must have taken it home for repairs. Historians still argue whether coffeehouse owners personalized brewing pots to advertise roast profiles or simply to prevent thieving neighbors from swapping tin for brass during busy hours. Either theory feels plausible when metal gleams like treasure in the morning glare. Down at board level, the night leaps again. Spectacles clearly embracing a dance till you drop mantra. The cat's head tracks the L-shaped motion with predatory focus, proving that chivalry can be feline entertainment. The janissary, just off duty, ambles back inside carrying 2 pomegranates. He slices one open on a saucer, seeds glistening like rubies, and places the halves near each player for luck. Joke 3 pops in wearing a fruit vendor's apron, noting that if antioxidants equaled ELO points, this match would qualify for Grandmaster vitamins. The elder finally picks up a sunrise spark locum, pops it into his mouth, and lets pepper heat bloom between strategic thoughts. His eyes brighten. Perhaps the candy jolts the next idea free. He slides his vizier 1 square, quietly offering a queen trade neither side can refuse because, well, there's no queen on the board, just habit-steering wording. You grin, the players do too. Even masters miss pieces that already retired to the airing shelf. Attention shifts when the apprentice brings in a water ewer etched with cloud motifs, pouring cool sips into tulip-shaped glasses. Refreshment glints and condensation droplets march downhill like tiny explorers. You raise yours, clink it gently against an invisible toast. To eyelids that forgot how to close, the liquid tastes faintly of cucumber. A second mainstream fact paddles in. Ottoman cisterns sometimes stored sliced melons to sweeten public water, a practice engineers debate today for both hygiene and whimsy. Spectacles declines the vizier challenge by nudging a rook, erecting a scaffold of defense along the second rank. The poets dutifully recite a couplet. The rook wakes walls slash where silent pawns now stand like stalls. Better than last hour's rooster fiasco. The calligrapher applauds silently, then sketches the line in miniature along his notebook's margin. You notice sunlight crawling higher, licking at the sapphire lantern's base until blue becomes pale jade. Shadows shorten, heat lifts. Somewhere outside, a baker slaps dough against a stone hearth, resonating like distant drum rolls. The juggler, still seated, instinctively tosses 3 pomegranate seeds into the air, catching each between forefinger and thumb without staining his cuffs. The elder rolls his obsidian ring, counterclockwise today, and edges a pawn forward to mirror the rook's new shield, forming a deceptively sleepy barricade. Scholars of Ottoman warfare might compare it to spit and mud ramparts thrown up overnight during surprise sieges. Historians still argue whether those quick walls deterred armies or simply redirected their lunch breaks. Field journals cite both outcomes. Sunlight now puddles across half the board, making pearl squares glare like polished ice. Spectacle squints and requests a cloth. The apprentice unfurls a thin silk awning overhead, tinting the battle in soft teal. Light diffuses into seafloor glow, calmer on tired eyes. Joke 1 peeks back, noting this is possibly the world's first chest sunshade and definitely the only one installed between moves 11 and 12. Silence settles again, broken only by distant gulls and the cat's slow biscuits kneading cushion fabric. You sip remaining cucumber water, feel coolness fan through veins, and realize fatigue has shifted from sharp to velvety. The board's pieces appear to float in an aquarium, bobbing with each blink. Yet curiosity anchors you. Who will blink first, the rook fortress or the vizier's creeping influence? The elder leans in, examines diagonals, then surprises everyone by advancing a bishop into that teal-lit glare, pinning Spectacle's knight to a vital pawn. Tension tightens. Even the cat pauses mid-need. The janissary sets his pomegranate half aside, scribbling morning pin beneath previous odds. Spectacles responds by rotating his spectacles, not to see better, but as ritual, then shifts the knight to safety, sacrificing the pawn it once protected. A small clap circulates. Honorable trades still earn applause vouchers here. A fresh breeze swirls sneakers of jasmine, sent through the open door. Vendors outside call, Balak, Balak, advertising early fish hauls, while a water seller's bell chimes like tiny cymbals. Life accelerates beyond these walls, but inside, the Coffeehouse maintains its aquarium hush, each move releasing ripples rather than splashes. The proprietor announces a short pause for stretching and spine realignment. Players rise, arms overhead. You follow suit. Vertebrae pop like faraway firecrackers, and daylight kisses eyelids from above. The cat uses the break to claim the newly sun-warmed square abandoned by the sacrificed pawn. Ultimate opportunist. You lower arms, reclaim cushion, and watch as pieces re-engage. The sunshade still filters teal calm onto the board. Piney coffee, peppery locum, tangy soup, and citrus peels mingle in air currents. Patience reigns, unrushed, unruffled, guiding pawns and people alike through the gentle puzzle of morning. Teal shadows ripple as the silk awning flutters, and you notice how the sun, newly emboldened, pokes a bright fingernail through one loose edge, spotlighting the sacrificed pawn now serving as the cat's personal pillow. She blinks in slow contentment, clearly pleased with the property upgrade. Joke 1 swaggers in like an overpaid real estate agent, whispering that feline zoning regulations always favor affordable single-square studios with excellent morning exposure. Spectacle settles back first, pressing a cool glass bead to each temple before returning them to a tiny pouch, his private ritual for steady nerves. The Basil elder follows, smoothing the hem of his robe, then traces the obsidian ring's spiral twice, clockwise, as though winding a pocket watch only he can hear. The board absorbs their refocused hush. Even the calligrapher pauses mid-ink swirl, pen hovering like a hummingbird frozen by sudden hush. A mainstream historical fact drifts across the muggy air. 17th-century Ottoman guild statutes permitted coffeehouses to operate as impromptu mediation courts, the proprietor empowered to arbitrate small disputes. You imagine tonight's proprietor banging a ladle for order, only to rule that the cat keeps the pawn because possession really is 9/10 of hospitality. Outside, a coppersmith begins rhythmic tapping that syncs oddly with your heartbeat. Ting ting ting, like pawns marching in iron boots. A market porter shouts about eggplants, dark as midnight sins. And a distant muezzin rehearses the noon call, stretching vowels that loft over the rooftops like silk scarves on an updraft. The city is fully awake, yet inside this lantern garden the tempo remains a dignified glide. The apprentice glides back with a new wonder. Tiny bowls of mulberry molasses stirred into cracked ice. To cool courage, he claims. You take a spoonful. Sweetness folds into frost, leaving a faint purple mustache across your lip. Joke 2 hops out wearing a berry-colored fake beard, noting that respectable strategy always benefits from a dignified sugar disguise. Spectacles breaks the pause, sliding his rook along the third rank, connecting towers like twin lighthouses scanning for marauding bishops. The poets lean in, deciding whether rook best rhymes with spook or cooked. The mustache spoon dandy votes for neither, suggesting baroque because it sounds expensive. Debate fizzles when the juggler balances 3 half-melted ice shards on his knuckles and declares any rhyme containing drips automatically earns bonus points. The elder counters with a slow pawn nudge, modest on the surface yet secretly reinforcing the teal-lit bishop still pinning Spectacles' knight. You appreciate the move's subtle echo of yesterday's siege tactics, earthworks inching forward while banners distract. A quirky tidbit whispers that some Ottoman fort commanders placed musicians on ramparts so enemy scouts focused on melodies instead of counting cannons. Historians still argue whether that was psychological brilliance or simply generals craving background music during overtime. Teal cloth flutters again as a breeze snakes through shutter slats. With it arrives a waft of freshly split cedar. A carpenter sanding planks outside for a new spice stall. The scent melds with lingering mulberry, pepper butter, cucumber water, and faint sandalwood ash, composing an accidental perfume you mentally label Patience number 23. You inhale, filing it alongside Midnight Garden After Rain. Spectacles now attempts liberation. He advances the knight 2 daring hops, snapping the pin and planting the horse square in the elder's half. Gasps flutter, and even the cat lifts her head, whiskers twitching like antennae tuned to tactical shockwaves. Joke 3 wheels in on a hobby horse, suggesting the knight deserves oats and a motivational podcast after that commute. The janissary adjusts odds, again scribbling galloping sunbeam across a fresh lid. Coins, tulip bulbs, and a single apricot pitch shuffle between piles. You recognize some bettors from last night's first match, their eyes ringed with equal parts fatigue and giddy devotion. Apparently slow chess is the empire's most contagious insomnia. Without blinking, the elder responds. Vizier slides sideways, ignoring the knight to spear point a pawn guarding Spectacles' still-shadowed king. A whispered murmur rises, counter-threat. You see the dilemma crystallize. Rescue the monarch or press the offensive. The calligrapher sketches 2 diverging spirals, labeling them forked fate. You dab mulberry mustache with a napkin, pulse quickening. For a moment you forget the weight of sleepless hours. Only possibility matters, expanding like dough under warm linen. Spectacles squints, rotates Spectacles, ritual again, then selects the teal-lit bishop, sending it toward the vizier in a swift, decisive arc. Pieces click. Threat neutralized but new weaknesses bloom. The proprietor studies the evolving pattern while polishing a brass tray. He confides softly that some patrons swear each board develops a personality. Some generous, some cruel, others mischievous. This one, he says, is a poet. It likes metaphors over massacres. The open scholarly debate phrase slips in. Researchers still argue whether board personality reflects player mood or if human brains simply project narrative onto marble grains. You glance at the opalescent squares, half expecting them to wink in solidarity. The plate of sesame simit arrives fresh from the baker's boy, crust crackling like sun-baked gravel. You accept a ring, break it open, and find steam swirling inside as if hoarding the dawn you just witnessed. The cat inches closer, eyes round. You surrender a buttery fragment. Diplomacy thrives on carbohydrate aid packages. Back at the battlefield, pawns trade along the teal file, each capture punctuated by soft taps and half-muttered couplets. The mustache dandy finally lands a keeper. Teal shadows guard, pearl soldiers spar. Slash dawn's hush decides how brave we are. The poets clap. The juggler juggles a simit chunk, seed spray sparkling in sunlight. Hours and moves slip by in mosaic tears. Knight faints, rook reevaluations, pawns crystallizing into uneasy stalemate walls. Yet tension hums louder because the piece count thins, magnifying every square's consequence. You sip melting mulberry ice, savor cedar breezes, and note exhaustion has been replaced by a curiously lucid calm, like rowing through fog toward bells you trust but cannot see. Finally, the elder draws breath, lifts his bishop that's been biding time on the far left, and steers it on a teal-lit diagonal no-one guarded check. Spectacle's rook blocks, but the defense costs tempo. The vizier realigns with surgical elegance, slicing escape corridors. 2 moves later, almost anticlimactic, the rook pins itself to spare the king, and the elder's pawn, yes, an unassuming pawn, advances to deliver silent mate from the flank. No flourishes, no bead theatrics. Just wood on pearl, final and inevitable, a wave of soundless awe rolls across cushions. Spectators exchange slow smiles rather than claps, as though applauding would break porcelain certainty. Spectacles exhales, cheeks ballooning, then laughs. A bright, unhurried laugh that shakes fatigue from rafters. He extends his hand. The elder clasps it, sealing another chapter in the board's unfolding poem. You lean back, heart steady, mind floating somewhere between cedar scent and teal glow. Another game complete. Another little universe folded and tucked onto the airing shelf. Sunlight now owns the room, but inside, lantern garden tranquility refuses eviction. You pop the last mulberry shard, feel sugar bloom, and wonder, is it really day if time still moves at midnight speed? Mid-morning sunbeam has climbed all the way to the lintel, yet inside the Kavahane the mood refuses to accelerate. Someone, it seems, has set the entire room's metronome to perpetual siesta. You shift your cushion a thumb-width away from the glowing rectangle of light, letting it warm one knee while the rest of you cools in teal shade. The cat approves your spatial negotiating skills, draping her tail across the pawn she earlier adopted as a pillow. Joke 1 tiptoes in wearing a tiny referee whistle. You congratulate yourself on brokering the day's most peaceful land use treaty, cat versus sunbeam, with the second match now folded onto the airing shelf. Rook and pawn side by side like exhausted actors. The proprietor directs the apprentice to place fresh boards on 3 smaller tables. New patrons drift in. A spice wholesaler smelling of cloves, a traveling loot repairer balancing a velvet-lined toolkit, and 2 young Janissary cadets eager to practice mental marching drills. Each nods respectfully to Spectacles and the Basil Elder, who have retired to opposite divans to sip restorative cucumber water. A mainstream historical fact strolls into the conversation on the loot repairer's cedarwood breath. Midday coffeehouses often doubled as open reading rooms where traveling artisans recited court bulletins for illiterate patrons. You watch the proprietor unroll one such parchment. Fresh ink, edges still curling, and tack it near the door. Words glisten, but no one rushes. Literacy here moves at the pace of steeping tea. The apprentice returns with yet another novelty. Sutlukav a la tortoise. Coffee gently warmed by a wrought iron brazier filled with glowing coals, and, this is the flourish, 3 live tortoises wandering beneath the grate to keep the embers evenly disturbed. A quirky tidbit whispers that palace fates once used lamp-bearing tortoises in tulip gardens. Apparently the reptile's leisurely gait matched the empire's decorative patience. You accept a clay cup and watch steam curl over the rim in slow arabesques, almost matching the creature's deliberate scuffle under iron. Spectacles, revived, joins the spice wholesaler for a fast, meaning merely medium slow, round of tabula in the corner. Dice clatter like polite gravel. and the cadets applaud each roll as if strategizing for future sieges. The basil elder, meanwhile, dozes against tie-dyed cushions, one hand still loosely cupped around the obsidian ring as though guarding the room's chronometer. You suspect he's dreaming in diagonals and teal light. Outside, the carpenter's cedar scent yields to fresh paint fumes. Someone nearby is lacquering gondola oars in crimson stripes that wink through shutter slats. The poets return, pockets bulging with half-eaten simmet, and offer to commemorate the tortoise lamp coffee in verse. Their first line, "Shell on ember, brew remembers," earns a groan from the lute repairer. Joke 2 twirls a powdered sugar baton, winking that every pun needs a forgiving audience and a second draft. Back at your table, you swirl the sutlukov, savoring how milk softens the piney bite of menengic still haunting your palate. The tortoises shove embers with slow determination, their shells modeled like miniature topographical maps of forgotten islands. You wonder if the cat will launch a reconnaissance mission, but she merely blinks, declaring neutrality. A messenger barges through the door, dusty boots, forehead slick, brandishing a scroll sealed with green wax. He bows to the proprietor, requests the quietest corner, and collapses onto a reed mat, parchment untouched. You catch a glimpse of the seal, twin tulips crossed over a crescent. Historians still argue whether such green wax missives signified mundane tax tallies or delicate espionage. Scholars sift palace archives for clues but mostly find coffee stains. Everyone pretends not to pry, yet curiosity hangs in the air like sandalwood smoke. The lute repairer uses the lull to demonstrate fretboard filing, each rasping stroke merging with the distant coppersmith's hammer into a duet of metallic hush. You ease deeper into cushions, letting the sounds braid around you. Joke 3 sidles in wearing earplugs made of cotton candy, remarking that if all workshops adopted this tempo, city noise ordinances could be replaced by picnic blankets. Sunlight continues its march, now glinting off the amber bead in your pocket. You roll it between forefinger and thumb, feeling warmth radiate from its honey core, and recall the elder's words, "A daylight compass." Outside the shutters, shadows tilt southeast. Time to decide whether to drift out or nestle deeper. The bead seems to pulse. "Stay," it murmurs. So you set it beside the tortoise lamp coffee, letting light pass through resin into milky brew, turning breakfast into stained glass. Spectacles dice skitter again. He grins at the wholesaler, scooping up counters shaped like tiny star anise. One cadet takes notes on a scrap of parchment, scribbling betting odds with the same charcoal stick the janissary used overnight. Callbacks abound. Lids, tulip bulbs, saffron vials, all now repurposed as markers on tabula tracks. The room recycles stories as effortlessly as it recycles props. A gust carries in bread yeast aromas from a distant bakery preparing lunch pied. Combined with cedar paint fumes and tortoise char embers, the scent collage loops you back to midnight locum and tamarind, an olfactory mosaic mapping every hour you've lived inside these walls. You glance at the reed blind's teal edge, frayed from earlier fluttering, and remember the teal sunshade above the board. Details pile like chess pieces in reserve, each awaiting promotion to memory. The messenger stirs, downs a tortoise lamp coffee handed to him by the apprentice, then snaps the green seal, scanning lines so slowly you feel syllables land like pawns. His eyebrows lift. News? Edict? Love letter? He pockets the scroll, mutters thanks, and exits, leaving behind only the scent of dust and something else. Clove, perhaps, or anticipation. The poets vow to turn the scene into a cautionary ballad. The calligrapher already sketches a silhouette titled, "Man Bearing Secrets." You lean back, accepting that noon is only minutes away. Your eyelids flutter, heavy with the weightless fatigue of prolonged attentiveness. Yet the room continues spinning new tales. Tortoise-powered coffee, teal cat pillows, green seal whispers, each link forging a chain you're reluctant to break. You sip another swirl of milky glaze, watch the tortoises nudge glowing coals, and decide the universe can sprint elsewhere. Here, you'll keep pacing your breaths to shell steps and dice clacks. The wheeze of the brazier mingles with the carpenter's final hammer taps, signaling that morning has quietly surrendered to full noon. Sunlight, now bright enough to make even the teal sunshade blink, slips beneath its hem and splashes your ankles in warm brass. You roll the amber bead across your palms, feeling its pulse sync with a pulse you had forgotten you owned. The cat notices the flicker, swats once, then decides the bead is beneath her pay grade and resumes her kingdom napping on the X-pawn pillow. Joke 1 sails in wearing an accountant's visor. You silently log the cat's working hours and realize she's on track for Employee of the Month with 0 deliverables. Spectacles finishes tabula with a narrow victory. Star Anise counters clatter like miniature tambourines as he bows to the spice wholesaler. The basil elder stirs from his divan, blinking away dream cobwebs, and joins you at the tortoise lamp station. He studies the reptiles, their shells now faintly ash-dusted, and murmurs a mainstream historical fact. Palace zoos once loaned out tortoises for nocturnal garden parties because their slow shuffle made perfect moving candles. You picture tulip beds glowing with turtle lanterns, low-speed constellations lighting the grass. The elder chuckles, recalling that one escaped into the Sultan's mint garden and wasn't found until autumn, fatter and more fragrant than state finances. Lunch arrives in copper bowls. Slow-braised lamb with dried apricots, pearl barley pilaf threaded with dill, and curls of pickled turnip dyed shocking magenta. The apprentice explains the dish is hunker bajendi for budget palates, then slides you a portion. A quirky tidbit rides in on the stew's steam. Some cooks tested doneness not by texture, but by how quietly the meat sighed when poked with a cedar skewer. Loud hiss meant another hour, silent breath meant royalty ready. You nudge a chunk. It exhales like a satisfied poet. Across the room, the lute repairer strings a quick improvisation, notes wandering like cats across parapets. 2 Janissary cadets unroll a travel chess mat, painted silk with seashell pieces, intent on proving tactics learned by osmosis overnight. Their first move is illegal. The poets clap anyway, awarding points for early boldness. You sip stew broth, savoring apricot's sweet tug against lamb's baritone, when the basil elder leans close and whispers the open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue whether lunch stews in Istanbul drew more influence from Persian fruit cooking or Balkan winter fare. He votes for both, because empires eat in spirals. Outside, a peddler selling pickled cucumbers wails a melody, so plaintive you'd think brine could cure heartbreak. Inside, wooden spoons clink bowls, and the smell of dill lifts fatigue off your shoulders like a friendly gull catching an updraft. Joke 2 sachets through wearing a chef's toque. You conclude if therapists served stew instead of advice, most problems would dissolve by the second ladle. The messenger with the green wax scroll re-enters, this time less breathless, scanning the room before settling near the lute repairer. He orders a tortoise lamp coffee and flips the parchment face down, perhaps letting news ferment until it tastes less urgent. The poets eye the scroll like kittens circling yarn, but the proprietor's stern arch of eyebrow keeps curiosity on a leash. You brush crumbs off the kilim, noticing how teal threads fade into ochre where countless shoes have turned. Those threads remind you of last night's teal sunshade and the water clock drip, now silent, having run itself dry. The apprentice refills it with fresh Bosphorus water, then flicks a droplet onto each tortoise shell, for luck. Joke 3 paddles by on a water clock plank, remarking that hydration is everyone's business model in this establishment. Cups, cisterns, reptiles, clocks. Spectacles wanders over with a fresh board, proposing a friendly endgame study. King, rook, and 3 pawns against the elder's lone bishop and wizened knight. You volunteer to observe, acting as unofficial timekeeper, though here time is measured in stew cooling rates rather than minutes. The cat volunteers too, sprawling exactly where the rook hopes to travel. After negotiating with a butter scrap, you relocate her 2 squares left. She accepts the compromise without clause. Progress in feline-human diplomacy. First move. The elder advances the bishop to pin a pawn. Spectacles releases a rook-rook, humming a tune the poets claim is an old caravan dirge. Midway, the lute repairer pauses his tune to sprinkle rosin dust on the strings. The powder floats in afternoon light like gold slivers, then settles on your stew, making it sparkle as if blessed by itinerant muses. A breeze sneaks in, carrying spice market gossip. Saffron prices climbing like rooftop cats. The spice wholesaler pockets his tabula winnings, already calculating margins. You swirl broth, thinking of saffron's red threads and the tulip cannons embroidered above the hearth. Threads, petals, fire. The Empire's color code for pay attention. Spectacles attempts a rook ladder but fumbles coordination. The Basil Elder counters with a knight fork, forcing the rook back. The cadets gasp, scribbling diagrams that look suspiciously like doodled halberds. The proprietor, passing with a tray of copper spoons, murmurs that knights teach humility, bishops teach patience, and pawns teach budgeting. You tuck that aphorism into mental parchment beside patience is the ink. Overhead, the teal awning sighs and finally unhooks, fluttering down like a retiring banner. Sunlight floods the board, setting pearl squares ablaze. You squint, then shift the fallen cloth into your lap as an impromptu shawl. Still cool, still smelling of sea breeze. The calligrapher smiles, sketching you in one fluid line. Watcher draped in teal, you feel strangely knighted. The water clock resumes its measured drip. Fresh cycle, fresh score. The tortoises, perhaps motivated by noon brightness, crawl another centimeter, nudging coals just enough to hiss stray sparks. You shield the teal cloth. Amber bead catches stray light and fires back a tiny sunbeam onto the board, straight at Spectacles King. Everyone laughs at fate's laser pointer. The elder seizes the omen, vaults his knight into the decisive fork again. Spectacles tips his king with theatrical grace. Conceding, applause rolls like soft drum taps. Bowls empty. Stew sighs contentedly from belly to brain. The proprietor declares a 30-minute digestion recess. You recline, teal shawl over shoulders, lulled by cedar scent, lute arpeggios, and the faint rattle of dice as cadets switch back to tabula and this yogic stretch of early afternoon. You realize the Coffeehouse secret. Every match, meal, and melody is just another turn of a giant. Invisible rook that loops day into night and back into day, slow, deliberate, inevitable. You close your eyes, feel the board reset behind your lids, and drift where lantern light and sunshine share the same soft glow. The afternoon sun climbs higher, casting long, lazy shadows that stretch across the kilim like the fingers of a drowsy giant. You shift your weight, feeling the familiar cushions mold to your form, and notice the cat has claimed a new throne atop a stack of folded textiles. Eyes half-lidded in regal approval. Joke one saunters in wearing a sun hat and oversized spectacles, whispering that even the brightest sun can't outshine the glow of a well-brewed cup. Spectacles and the Basil Elder resume their stations, the chessboard between them gleaming under the now raised blinds. A stray sunbeam ricochets off the Elder's obsidian ring, sending a tiny prism dancing across mother-of-pearl squares. A mainstream historical fact drifts softly into the room. Ottoman coffeehouses served as hubs of social and political discourse where ideas brewed as richly as coffee and patrons debated everything from poetry to empire. The apprentice glides by with a tray of fresh simmet, sesame-crusted rings still warm and fragrant. As you break off a piece, the crunch echoes softly, a satisfying punctuation to the day's slow rhythm. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some regulars believed sharing simmet forged a pact of friendship and trust, a silent treaty sealed over crumbs and casual conversation. Outside, vendors call, horses trot, and a blacksmith's hammer rings steady counterpoint. Inside, time folds on itself, each moment stretching and contracting like the gentle rise of a breath. The match unfolds with deliberate grace. Spectacles advances a knight, its carved mane catching sunlight like spun gold. The elder counters with a bishop's slide that seems to trace calligraphy across the board. Historians still argue whether Ottoman players valued aesthetic beauty above ruthless efficiency. But this game feels like dance, each move a choreographed step. The apprentice returns with kaymak, clotted cream thick and sweet, perfect with simmet. You savor a bite, warmth sinking deeper into bones. Joke two tiptoes in, noting that if life were as smooth as kaymak, every Monday would feel like a national holiday. The cat stretches, yawns, and settles back, purring, a living metronome matching the water clock's drip. You lean into the cadence. Distant street noise, fluttering blinds, quiet peace clicks. Outside, the afternoon even rises, weaving a melodic thread through the city tapestry. Inside, players pause, heads bowed. Contest suspended between sacred ritual and worldly strategy. When the call fades, the elder lifts his rook, placing it with the care of a master craftsman settling the final tile of a mosaic. Tension eases like a soft sigh. You sip coffee, cardamom still lingering, a hint of rosewater laced in. Joke 3 winks from behind the water clock. You figure if spreadsheets came scented with rosewater and cardamom, quarterly reports might actually lull accountants to sleep instead of causing it. Outside clamor grows. The clang of pans in soup kiosks, staccato bargaining near the spice arcade. Yet none of it disturbs the slow orbit of thoughts beneath this roof. You realize that here every pause, every chew, every measured move comprises a miniature story waiting to bloom, like a tulip bulb biding spring. The elder leans back, studying the prism still waltzing across squares. Spectacles mirrors him, eyes reflecting pearl glints. You breathe in the mingled scents of sesame, cream, and old cedar furniture, marveling how an ordinary afternoon can stretch into a cathedral of hush and possibility. Late afternoon sunlight ripens into a mellow apricot wash, stretching amber fingers across the kavahane until even the tortoise lamp coals glow shyly in reply. You ease deeper into your teal shawl, feeling its sea salt scent mingle with sesame dust still drifting from the last simmet break. The cat abandons her pawn pillow for a higher perch on the folded sunshade. Throne number 3 in her growing real estate empire, Joke 1 doffs a tiny realtor cap, whispering that diversification is the surest path to 9-figure naps. Spectacles and the Basil elder reconvene at their favored table, deciding to analyze a famous endgame from the archives instead of sparking a third marathon. The apprentice unfurls an ink-smudged diagram rescued from the airing shelf. Just 2 kings, 1 rook, and a single stubborn pawn. Minimalism after morning's Baroque siege. Sunlight glints off the elder's obsidian ring as he rotates it once clockwise, signaling intellectual engines idling back to life. A mainstream historical fact drifts through the warm air. Ottoman scholars of the 18th century compiled illustrated Mangala and chess endgame treatises, believing concise problems sharpened civic virtues the way sword drills honed reflexes. You picture palace scribes hunched over parchment, cross-referencing battle reports with board positions to prove patience truly wins wars. While players weigh the diagram, the apprentice returns with a new refreshment. Levanta Cerbetti, lavender cordial cooled in a clay jug buried beneath mint beds since dawn. 1 sip paints your palate spring purple. Tension in shoulders melts like wax. A quirky tidbit accompanies the drink. Some apothecaries claimed lavender sharpened dreams into usable blueprints, inspiring architects to sketch domes they'd never dare imagine while awake. You glance at the vaulted ceiling. Was Levanta hiding in those bricks all along? Outside, a cymbal maker tests freshly tuned plates, their shimmer riding the breeze in bright metallic spirals. Inside, the lute repairer plucks a simple Hazam scale that slides between cymbal peals, lacing the room with languid optimism. Spectators hum along, and even the Janissary cadets tap armored fingertips against teacups, transforming discipline into percussion. Back at the board, the elder demonstrates a rook bridge. Spectacles nods, then purposely misplaces the rook to ask, "What if anxiety stepped on the line?" The cat flicks her tail, apparently offended by hypotheticals that disregard straightforward pouncing. Joke 2 pirouettes in ballet slippers. You muse that feline coaching might elevate grandmaster play, provided humans agree to schedule matches strictly between nap windows. You sip more lavender and sense the day tilt. Sunlight eases into rose gold, edging closer to that hour when shadows lengthen like pulled taffy. The proprietor lights 2 low oil lamps pre-scented with clove and dried fig, creating an aromatic handshake between afternoon and evening. Historians still argue whether early cafe keepers scented lamps to entice tired bureaucrats or to mask lingering tobacco haze. Conflicting diaries insist both motives smell equally profitable. Spectacles now flips the board 90 degrees, new vantage, new insight. He repositions pieces and invites you to suggest a line. Heart flutters. You, a silent observer since midnight, suddenly a guest conductor. Remembering the amber beads, daylight compass. You point to a quiet rook lift 2 squares higher. Whispered murmurs approve. The elder's eyes twinkle like mother of pearl under lantern flare. He counters with a king sidestep that preserves opposition yet invites zugzwang. The Janissary scribbles spectator gambit across his newest betting lid. pushing forward 2 bay leaves as novelty steaks. Street sounds shift again. Fishmongers pack ice, washerwomen slap linen, and somewhere a storyteller pitches his voice to compete with squeaking gulls. Inside, quiet reigns while lavender cordial dwindles. The apprentice circulates with chilled towels dipped in rosewater. To keep brains from boiling, he jokes. Joke 3 elbows its way in wearing a spa robe. If corporate boardrooms adopted noon rose towel service, quarterly meltdowns would smell a lot nicer. Your eyes wander to the parchment bulletin tacked near the door. The green wax messenger, now rested, stands reading it aloud for an elderly vendor whose eyesight falters. The decree concerns new quay fees for spice dows. No intrigue, just numbers. But the vendor thanks him as though he'd recited epic verse. You feel a soft click of understanding. Here, even tariffs travel on gentle velocities. Focus returns to the board. The elder nudges his pawn 1 square. Spectacles hesitates, then realizes every king move walks into a skewer. He laughs, topples the lone monarch with theatrical sorrow, and declares the position a velvet snare. Applause rises, no coins, no bulbs, only contented sighs and a single clove-scented flame dancing brighter for victory. Players bow out. Attention drifts to new diversions. The lute repairer invites you to pluck a string. Its resonance thrums right through the amber beads still warming your palm. Outside, clouds pinken. Pigeons gather on eave lines, gossiping about dusk. The water clock releases a plink that sounds almost like applause for daylight's closing act. You stretch, noticing fatigue swirling back, but soft, like quilt batting instead of iron chains. The proprietor senses collective drift and announces pre-sunset mira. A strong, bitter coffee served in thimble cups, meant to reset palates before evening fare. He warns, with mock gravitas, that refusing mira insults hospitality. You accept gladly. Bitterness sparks awake the tiniest dragons behind your eyelids, promising at least one more stanza of attentiveness. A gentle reality check floats in. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen joke from Section 2? Some caravaner near the door repeats the same ancient remedy to amused newcomers. Callbacks swirl around like lantern moths, affirming the Coffeehouse's circular logic. Stories never end. They lower their volume until fresh listeners arrive. Shadows finally kiss the far wall, paw prints of nightfall. Lamps bloom brighter. Fig clove mist thickens. You cradle the mira, letting bitter edges carve a corridor between afternoon languor and the coming hush of dusk. The cat descends from her cloth throne, stretches, and pads toward you, granting permission for a brief chin scratch in exchange for the final simmet crumb at your elbow. Transaction complete, she returns to patrol, ever vigilant for the next square of warmth. Pieces, parchments, and lavender cups await evening's continuation. But for now you sit suspended in the day's golden hinge. Not quite afternoon, not yet evening. Just an amber interlude where chess becomes geometry of gratitude and every breath tastes faintly of flowers grown for patience. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that stretch like lazy cats across the Kilim, and the Coffeehouse settles into a gentle twilight hum. You feel the warmth of the day slowly ebbing, replaced by the cool promise of evening, while the cat reoccupies her cushioned kingdom, eyes half closed yet tracking every flicker of lamplight. Joke 1 tiptoes in wearing a lantern hat, whispering that even the stars envy the glow inside these walls. Spectacles and the basil elder drift back to the mother-of-pearl board, its squares now shimmering under oil lamps that bloom like miniature moons. A mainstream historical fact floats in with the first waft of roasted beans. Ottoman coffeehouses doubled as stages for storytellers and musicians, transforming caffeine pit stops into informal academies of shared culture and calm debate. You imagine the stone walls absorbing centuries of whispered secrets, each pour a vault for slow gossip and slower moves. The apprentice glides by balancing a tray of fresh baklava, its honey-lacquered layers glistening as though they've trapped the last blush of sunset. You break off a triangle. Pistachio crumble releases a sigh of sweetness that balances the lingering bite of the strong, nearly inky coffee in your demitasse. A quirky tidbit sticks to your tongue along with the syrup. Certain bakers swear that an odd number of phyllo layers attracts fortune, while an even count risks luring mischievous gin into the pantry. You count 13. Fortune favors the sugar-addicted outside. The distant muezzin threads a slow, ribbon-like call through the evening air, weaving a melodic tapestry that seems to stall time mid-stride. The Basil elder adjusts his turban, eyes twinkling as he surveys the position. Spectacles hovers a knight over the board, its carved mane catching lamplight like spun gold. Historians still argue whether such unhurried pacing reflected a cultural devotion to contemplation or simply matched the mellow buzz of a room steeped in cardamom and conversation. Either way, the current match proceeds with the elegance of ink sliding across vellum. The cat stretches, yawns, and curls tighter, her purr syncing perfectly with the water clock's measured drip. Metronome set to lull. You settle deeper, letting baklava sweetness fuse with coffee bitterness until taste buds achieve a diplomatic truce. Joke two sidles in, noting that if spreadsheets came layered in honey and pistachio, end-of-quarter reports would draw standing ovations, not groans. A polite clack. Spectacles advances that gleaming knight 2 squares, spearing a pawn that had dozed on twilight duty. The elder counters by sliding a bishop down a diagonal bright as an evening comet, pinning an overconfident rook to its king. You hear a collective inhale. Gulls outside, Janissary cadets inside, even the tortoises beneath their ember grate. A mainstream fact pats your shoulder. Some chroniclers recorded decisive evening moves as moonlit strokes, archived alongside court poetry to prove that brilliance often blooms after sundown. The Apprentice now circulates with tulip stem glasses of chilled rosewater, each rim dusted in powdered sugar for dream insurance. You take a sip, floral coolness floats into your lungs, banishing the last noon heat. A fringe superstition claims a rosewater rinse before dusk sharpens memory of the night's dreams, though skeptics counter it merely perfumes snoring. Historians still argue whether dream recall rituals influenced actual policy. Did viziers propose laws dreamt up under rose-scented blankets? At the board, the Basil elder pauses, strokes his obsidian ring, clockwise this time, and executes a rook lift that hints at an impending backrank him. Spectacles brows knit. He rotates his silver loop glasses, then sends his queen gliding like moonlight across still water, offering a perplexing exchange. The Janissary, ever the oddsmaker, scratches lantern gambit. Across a new lid, wagering 2 cloves and a bay leaf that the elder will refuse parody and reach for artistic flourish instead. Joke 3 tiptoes by, wearing a baker's apron dusted with phyllo flakes. It whispers that odd-layer luck won't help if you miscount your bishops. You chuckle softly, aware that laughter in this room always lands on velvet. Never jarring, always part of the lullaby. Spectacles sips coffee, grimaces happily at its bitter depth, and finally concedes the queen trade. Pieces tumble into the apprentice's felt pouch like gentle rain. The elder responds not with immediate aggression but by repositioning that moon-slicked rook behind a line of patient pawns, knitting a fortress so quiet you almost miss its iron logic. You recall the goat hair sacks of Yemeni beans stacked near the hearth, realizing defense can smell like roasted certainty. Outside, vendors douse braziers. The last fishmongers rinse scales from hands while gossiping about breeze changes. Their chatter rolls in, light and irrelevant, yet soothing. A reminder the world beyond this lantern garden obeys clocks less forgiving. You cling to the suspended moment, breathing in scent layers of honey, coffee tar, and stale frankincense from morning offerings. The cat, perhaps sensing narrative crescendo, descends her textile ziggurat and sits precisely beside the amber bead, tail coiled like a small question mark. She looks first at you, then at the board, then blinks in feline code. Are we nearly done? You scratch behind her ear. Deal in purrs. The elder inhales, lifts his rook 3 squares, and with that single whisper-soft gesture, unveils an unavoidable mating net 2 moves deep. Spectacles recognizes the diagram instantly. He smiles, taps his king once in polite capitulation, and leans back. Relief drifts across the Coffeehouse like newly poured tea. Applause comes in forms beyond clapping. The lute repairer strums a mellow cadence. The apprentice clinks glasses together for a crystalline chime. The poets murmur a couplet. Lanterns bow to bishop's grace/evening crowns the patient face. Even the tortoises thump embers at uneven tempo, as if co-signing victory. With the game complete, the Basil elder gestures for baklava plates to circulate again. celebratory layers for all. You oblige, sugar softening any lingering edge of tension. Outside, the sky deepens from rose to plum. First stars blink, jealous, perhaps, of interior lamplight. Yet inside the Coffeehouse, starlight feels redundant. This room already sparkles with pearl squares, golden syrup, and stories glued by quiet awe. You close your eyes for one steady breath. Cardamom, honey, lavender, clove, and open them to find time once more at anchor, tethered by a water clock drip you hardly hear anymore. Night will rise, new matches will bloom, and patience will keep its gentle reign. For now, you savor a final crumb, scratch the cat's chin, and pocket odd-layer luck for tomorrow's dawn. A single charcoal smear of night clings to the eastern lattice, but dawn is already etching thin gold filigree along each wooden slat. You adjust the teal shawl, feeling its cool fibers drink in the first hush of morning, and notice the cat has migrated once more. Now perched atop the water clock, tail draped like a fuzzy question mark over the drip basin. Joke one pads in wearing a tiny rooster costume, whispering that someone has to announce sunrise and the local birds keep hitting snooze. The apprentice tiptoes past, swapping the now lukewarm menengic for a slim porcelain cup of sutlukov, the milk steamed just shy of froth so it shivers when the cup lands beside you. He winks. Last call for caffeine before the muezzin steals the headline. A mainstream historical fact slips into the steam. By the 19th century, Istanbul's dawn callers measured their pacing between minarets using coffee sips. Too slow, the brew cooled. Too fast, they'd reach the tower out of breath. You take a measured swallow, timing your pulse to that half-remembered ritual. Across the board, spectacles and the Basil elder agree to one final skirmish. No clocks, only the rule that pieces must move before the water clock empties its last vial. Spectacles plucks the amber bead from your palm, setting it on the king's square like a ceremonial crown. The elder grins, rotating his obsidian ring counterclockwise, as though unwinding the night so morning can slip in unnoticed. Opening moves glide. Pawns meeting in the center like travelers exchanging road stories. The calligrapher, eyelids heavy but pen still eager, sketches each formation in quick, looping strokes that resemble starlings wheeling at dusk. You watch ink bloom across parchment and think of lavender cordial, of shell-warm tortoises nudging coals, of every aroma stacked in the rafters waiting to re-perfume daylight. The cat voices her critique. A single delicate sneeze, just as spectacles advances a night. Joke two saunters by wearing a dustbuster sash, quipping that feline commentary carries more weight than the entire betting ledger. The janissary tips an imaginary hat in agreement, his lids now littered with scribbles and bay-leaf wagers. The elder counters with a bishop slide, lines of force crisscrossing like fishing nets on the Bosphorus. You remember a quirky tidbit murmured during an earlier pause. Some coastal villagers believed bishops were modeled after herons. Long-necked, patient, striking only when fish forgot to fear the stillness. On cue, the heron bishop spears a pawn, wood clacking soft as chopsticks. Outside, bakery shutters groan open. Sesame-laced air drifts in, trailed by the distant clatter of delivery carts. The poets, half asleep against a stack of cushions, roused long enough to coin a line. Bread rings halo sunrise, before slipping back into fig-dappled dreams. You pocket the phrase, suspecting it will taste good later atop a slice of simmet. Inside, tension thickens. Spectacles lifts his queen, the first display of outright ambition, and circles her above the squares like a falcon testing wind. Historians still argue whether Ottoman queens were deployed less aggressively than their European counterparts, an echo of court etiquette that prized reserve over spectacle. Here, the carved ivory piece pauses, then dives to anchor the center, talons out. The elder smiles, touching neither rook nor knight. Instead, he marches a humble pawn 2 squares, the same pawn you watched wander in Section 9, now reincarnated with sunrise bravado. It stands nose to beak with the queen, daring royalty to blink. Joke 3 waltzes in carrying a cardboard crown, whispering that nothing humbles a throne like a peasant with good posture. Spectacles hesitates, twirling the silver loops of his glasses. You sense the water clock bleeding seconds. Plink, plink, each drop a polite throat clear. He retreats the queen 1 square, conceding ground for harmony. The elder advances his pawn again, Promotion territory only 3 steps away, and the Janissary scrawls revolution across a fresh lid, staking 2 cracked pistachios on imminent glory. The apprentice arrives with thimbles of myrrh, the bitter jolt meant to sign and seal the night. You toss it back. Dark notes fan across your palate, snapping synapses awake long enough to witness the next pivot. The elder's pawn edges again, and again, escorted by bishop and rook like bodyguards ushering a folk hero toward coronation. Moments later it strikes the back rank. The apprentice digs in his pouch for the turban-topped vizier piece, crowning humility with authority. A soft gasp ripples. You feel it brush your cheek like the wings of moths. Spectacles surveys the board. King cornered by vizier and rook, flight squares stitched shut by that patient heron bishop. He exhales, nudges his monarch onto its side, and smiles into the elder's open hand. The water clock answers with its final drop. Glass echoes, then silence. Applause surfaces as collective exhale. Clove lamp flicker, lute string twang, tortoise shell tap, cat purr. A symphony of tiny thank yous to strategy, stamina, and the kindness of shared slowness. The elder restores the amber bead to you. Compass retires, he whispers. Let dreams steer now. Outside, the horizon blushes apricot. First gulls will overhead, rehearsing breakfast diplomacy. A fishmonger whistles the same 4 notes you've heard for 2 nights. Welcome, welcome, fresh. The proprietor begins snuffing lamps, smoke curling toward rafters where it will sleep until dusk. You rise, joints singing soft pops of gratitude, and slip the amber bead into your pocket beside the lavender-soaked napkin from hours ago. The cat escorts you to the door, likely angling for an early anchovy, but you accept the honor. Final glance. Spectacles and the elder clink demitasses. The calligrapher sprinkles gold dust over his last spiral. The apprentice feeds tortoises fennel fronds for breakfast. The room, still half-lit, half-dreaming, feels like a gentle heartbeat you can carry away. Now, bead warm, lungs scented with bitter coffee and dawn, you step into the pale street. Cobbles glow. Sea breathes. Somewhere a rooster finally commits to crowing late, but applause-worthy. You smile, knowing the slowest game in Istanbul will reset tonight, just as you prepare to reset into sleep. Settle now. Let the cobblestones fade beneath soft fog and feel your footsteps slow to nothing at all. The alley narrows, lantern glow dissolving into a calm hush, and you drift as lightly as cardamom steam rising from a forgotten cup. With each gentle breath, picture the Kavahane doors closing. Not with a clang, but with a quilted sigh, tucking chessboards, tortoises, and patient clove lamps into quiet dark. The amber bead in your pocket grows featherlight, pulse easing until it feels like a warm pebble at the center of a still pond. Inhale. A lavender breeze cools your temples. Exhale. Sesame sweetness drifts away, replaced by the hush of distant tides. Gulls mute their calls, wings folding against a sky rinsed in silver dawn. The cat curls somewhere beyond memory, her purr becoming the softest bassline barely audible in the cradle of your thoughts. No more rook forks to track, no vizier marches, only the steady glide of calm spreading from forehead to fingertips, from chest to soles. Imagine cushions gathering beneath you, countless stitches of teal and ochre forming a cloud that rises, lifting any remaining weight from ankles, from worries, from time itself. Lantern light dims to a single ember, then to a dot, then to a kind, velvety nothing. Every story you witnessed, every move you traced, floats downward like silk banners settling after a windless festival. Stacked layers of comfort covering you in quiet promise. Breathe once more. Let that final inhale carry in cool, salt-tinged air. Let the exhale carry out the very notion of hurry. Within this stillness, dawn pauses, waiting just outside closed lids. You are safe, unhurried, and held. An honored guest in the slowed heartbeat of history.